Thank you all for coming to my talk, A Scripter's Next Step. It's an interesting domain crossover here. We're going to be, depending on your experience in PowerShell, to introduce you to C# very quickly. So you don't need to know any C#. You probably do need a fair bit of PowerShell, given how many assumptions I'm making, in order to fit all of this in to the appropriate time. I apologize. I had a cold a couple of weeks ago, and ever since COVID, when I get a cold, I have a terrible cough, and it sounds like I'm dying for like a month. They assure me I'm not, but if I do start changing color, please go and find somebody. All right, maybe, fingers crossed. I'm Ryan Coates. I'm in this room far too many years in a row now. This is almost my 8th summit. I've been coming since 2015, 2016, one of those years. There was a bit of a gap there during the dark days, but I've spoken a number of years. My career has been kind of interesting, but I've spent the last 7 years as an engineering lead, helping a bunch of former operators become better at software development. So I figured, why don't I do a talk about that? So thanks to our sponsors. They're all very lovely. We like you all, especially chocolatey people. Only kidding. I don't pick favorites. As you know, these guys make all of this happen. We couldn't do this every year without them, so appreciate that. A little bit about me. I'm a recovering engineering leader. I actually left my last role in January, retired, and now I'm maybe regretting it because they decided to completely screw the market on me 2 weeks later. So, but no, I have no intention of changing that unless I absolutely have to. I listed the domains in here specifically because I think a lot of you are probably here for the same reason. You are probably operators who have, used PowerShell in your careers and are now going, well, this software thing's kind of cool. I do it every day in the form of PowerShell. What's next? Like, can I do more things with it? Obviously, you can, and no, you don't have to become a React developer, thankfully. Anybody here do software before IT operations? I know there's a few of those about, right? Yeah. So this is like just a nightmare scenario going back to it. All right, so let's start with why. Why would we want to become better at software, right? And there's a couple of arguments for and against, right? I think a lot of the fear in the software space these days around like career and jobs and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of people going, "Oh, software, don't need those people anymore. Just talk to my AI bot. It's going to do it all for me." That's not entirely true. I'll be using it a little bit later, but it's not the be all and end all. Software is an incredibly important skill to have. And I think as those of you who've evolved from when you first started using PowerShell as copy this command, run this command, hey, it solved a problem, great. I don't touch it again until I need to copy another command. Any early Exchange users here from the first version of PowerShell, those kind of days? Yeah. That was it. You go to the MSDN page, and it literally showed you the commands to copy and paste, and that was great. That's how I started with PowerShell. Until this guy put some video series together and decided he was going to try and teach me all of the ins and outs of advanced tool making. But it's a great way to start, and that's one of the kind of headaches a lot of people have with languages like C# is it doesn't have quite as low a barrier to entry, especially back then. That's not necessarily the case now, but it doesn't have that kind of real-time feedback that you get from a shell like PowerShell. That's one of the reasons Python's super popular as a first language as well, because I can just hack Python into my console and I'll get immediate feedback if the Python I typed in was good or bad and that kind of stuff, right? So it was really powerful kind of environment for us to start building these skills from one little command copy and pasted to building our own advanced functions and modules and commandlets and things like that. Any module authors in here? Yeah. How many of you are familiar with like advanced functions, things like that? All right, good. That was one of the assumptions, so I'm glad. Software, as you know, as folks who have built those types of advanced PowerShell modules, are incredibly flexible and powerful pieces of software, right? PowerShell itself is still just software. Anybody have a hard time identifying themselves as a software developer? That was one of the first things I got out of coming to this conference the first time was I kept saying, oh no, I'm not a developer. I'm not a developer. And one of the guys at the time, he sat me down and was like, does your PowerShell run in production? I was like, yeah. I'm a consultant. It runs in lots of people's productions. He's like, then you're a developer. And it wasn't so much, firstly, getting in that mindset is not a negative thing. I've always seen the little interesting Twitter fights about whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing for ops people. Oh, not all ops people need to learn to code. I was like, the challenge is doing anything that like what we do at the scale we do it now with cloud, software's a must. There's a reason we all picked up PowerShell years ago. And that's because clicking through, next, once or twice was problematic enough. Trying to do it 50, 100, 1,000 times is even more of a problem, right? So we build software, we put controls around it and constraints so we can only provide certain inputs arguments, so we can only get certain output arguments. That is software. That's why we do it, right? And that kind of builds our success at these kind of scales, right? And you look at the cloud these days. How many of you manage more servers today than you did 10 years ago? Yeah, because you can, right? That wasn't necessarily, that's not because servers are faster. That's not what makes you able to manage them. They're also not necessarily simpler or easier to manage, right? But the fact is the tools have kept up. They've allowed us to manage and operate these vast complex. I can spin up a data center now just by going to, Azure.com and saying, give me a new VNet somewhere. Now give me another one in Germany. Cool. Now I got a multinational data center with a replicated backbone, and it took me 2 lines of code to do it. I feel pretty good about myself. I used to do that by hand. It was not that quick, I assure you, right? So can't we just use AI instead? Well, I mean, you can try. I wouldn't suggest it. It's not the sanest career move out there. But AI is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. I mean, you can see how vested the vendors are in it. You can see how vested the industry is getting around it. Yes, there's a bit of buzzwordy to it. There's a lot of people that oversell and overpreach, just like with any new technology. But I think regardless of what the end state looks like, AI is here to stay, and AI is going to change the way we operate, right? APIs and software are that interface into AI more often than not, right? It's not just the chatbot piece of it, right? Oh yeah, I can talk to ChatGPT. Okay, that's one type of AI, right? But being able to build on top of these engines, these I'll loosely call them reasoning machines, right? There's not always the best reasoning that goes on behind them. Being able to build tooling on top of that, expose those interfaces to others, right? Like no code, low code is a huge boon area at the moment. What's the other term for it? Like robotic process automation, right? That exists because the engines that they sit on top have published, well-documented APIs, right? So no, Copilot is not gonna take your job, but it's gonna change your job, and if you can use and adopt it, more power to you. So, and why C#? This is the one I get a lot of stick for, because I posted a little bit of a clickbaity "don't learn Python" comment the other day. Let me clarify. I don't think you shouldn't learn Python. I don't think there's a significant amount of value to you as advanced PowerShell users learning Python next. Python is a dynamic language, so is PowerShell. Python doesn't care about static types, neither does PowerShell. Python has an interactive kind of REPL, so does PowerShell. Like, yeah, it cares a little bit more about objects in the kind of more historical way we would use classes in OOP. PowerShell kind of didn't necessarily do that the best way. But other than that, you're not necessarily evolving as a software developer. There's very little that you've brought other than I've learned new syntax. Now, the one thing AI will help you do is never worry about syntax again. Like I don't memorize Python code. I just say, this is what I need. This is the patterns I expect to confirm to and follow. Give me the Python code for it, right? I think even Mark Rasinovich, I think on one of his recent YouTube episodes with Hanselman, was saying the same thing. He's like, he's not a traditional Python developer. He doesn't even think he would call himself a Python developer, but he has to use Python an awful lot as the CTO of Azure, because Azure just means AI now to Microsoft, right? So everything that he's doing is a lot of AI research and stuff like that. So a lot of those tools are built in Python. Big cloud users here, lots of cloud people. Yeah, I mean, Python is an incredibly important tool in the cloud ecosystem as well, mainly because it's a first-class language in all three of the hyperscalers, whereas things like C#, I think they are too in all three of them, if you ask me, but there's definitely a bit more lag on the C# side for stuff that isn't Azure, and that just is what it is. Sometimes you can do things in Python out of the box that you can't do with .NET because there's not a .NET library for it, right? But I wouldn't say you should learn Python next, because I don't think you're necessarily learning a ton, right? You're not evolving in your craft, all right? So C#, it's a good next step for us. And why APIs? Well, hopefully I've done the last couple of years I've talked, have all my talks have been about APIs recently, because that, like I said, that was my job for the last 7 years. So I got very good at it, which, I spent most of my life living and breathing and researching good, well-practiced APIs, right? So had a lot of talks recently. I'm not going to go into as much depth in the areas I did in previous talks, but I will reference them if it comes up, where you can watch those. The content is pretty evergreen that I deliver. It's not only an API version 4, only useful this year. It's more, API good practices, API documentation good practices, things like that. But like I said, APIs are they're the glue of the internet, right? They're the thing, they're the interface. And when I say API, let me be clear. I'm specifically in this talk speaking about web APIs, REST APIs, things like that. APIs are obviously a generic software term that basically means everything. But web APIs specifically are the kind of building blocks of the internet, and it's how we wire things together. And again, as our data kind of explode, as our ways of manipulating and accessing that data and consuming it through AI and things like that, it's exploding. APIs are really that kind of lifeblood. So being able to write your own to solve whatever particular problems you have, perfectly fine. Why not just use a framework? Somebody called me out on this, I think, on my original post about this. And look, I got no hate for Pode. I think people think I might, because I don't generally bother writing PowerShell APIs anymore. I did start with Polaris a couple of years ago when that was the rage. That kind of got my appetite wet. But by then I'd got advanced enough in C# that it didn't really give me a ton of value. But again, I think for the average operator who just needs to throw something up quickly, these frameworks are perfectly acceptable. I don't think they're a bad idea. But this is a scripter's next step, not a script's next step. I'm not talking about taking your script and making it more useful. I'm talking about taking you and making you more useful, right? So you being able to use PowerShell yet another way is not a particularly large step up on the resume list. You being able to put C# software developer on your resume is a next step. That is something that accompanies your existing skill set and grows it, as opposed to just, I know C# 8 and 9, cool, right? All right, script is next step. So let's start with an intro to C#. Who's written any C# here? Matt, what are you guys here for? No, I'm just kidding. How long? Who's written any new C#? Okay, because I think this is where C# gets a lot of bad rap. C#'s been around a long time, right? 25 years or something stupid? It's been around a long time, and C# 1 is very much not the same as C# 13 or whatever we're up to now, right? So .NET 9 came out last year. Last year. And it is the current LTS version, LTS with an asterisk, because LTS in .NET now means like all of 18 months or something, right? 3 years maybe. So C# 9's been around for a while. .NET 9, sorry, C#. C# 13 is .NET 9, because Microsoft are really good at naming things. I did C#, or I tried C# years ago as well, and it was a much more of a traditional C style language back then, right? And it still is. It just has a lot of shortcuts and syntactic sugar and stuff that we didn't have back then. So it was a bit more difficult to kind of grok for a newbie, and it made that transition much more difficult. If you were a PowerShell developer and someone asked you to build a C# 2 app, this talk wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be able to give you a 4-hour summary of transitioning to C#. So thank you for all the improvements we've got to C#. Interestingly, a lot of the language improvements have incorporated things from languages like Python and Go and other things that have become popular in the industry for us, right? They've made a lot of shortcuts available to us in C# to the point that I can write a single line and it will usually compile and work, which is not normally how that worked, I assure you. And based on all the hands that went up, I assume you guys will remember that as well. I won't go too into detail then on the structure of a CS proj file. They have changed a little bit over the years as well, especially as we went to .NET Core. But hey, still up there, all right. But right, a CS proj file is kind of like a description file of your project, right? .NET's going to look for this, and it's going to inform the compiler a lot of decisions that it needs to make, right? So it's a pretty simple kind of XML style file format. It's well documented and understood. There are certain kind of blocks and elements that we care about, and some we don't. Normally, you're never going to write these by hand. You may occasionally edit them by hand, especially if you're a VS Code user, right? But if you're using Visual Studio or something, or Rider, sometimes you can edit them just by some of the other UI elements and stuff like that. But really, they're just defining things like our .NET version, our base SDK version, things like that. Dependencies, if we have a bunch of packages or library references, we call them out here. Think of this like the manifest file when you're making a module, right? It's like, hey, this is my module. There's all the things that my module cares about in order to work, right? So we have our key elements, our project SDK. That's obviously telling us what we care about here. And the interesting thing is you could actually just change this from SDK to SDK.web and hit go, and you could, you would now be able to build a web app. It would figure it all out for you. Property groups are broken down, and again, this is all well documented on MS Learn, so I'm not necessarily going to go too much into detail on that. Then there's a nullable keyword now. I think you can see that better probably here in some of the new .NET Core stuff. Nullable, enable, disable, right? This is really about whether or not we're actually going to allow null types. It's not traditional for a statically typed language to allow everything to be nullable, right? This just allows you to do it. You're going to get a lot of squiggly warnings and stuff in your IDEs, just warning you about, hey, this is a nullable value. It might be a problem down the road because you haven't actually defined it. You can actually turn that off if you don't want it. If you're building something that's a little more like constrained or cares a little bit more about nullability and things like that, you can disable that and say this app no nullable, right? Item group, I think we might touch on a little bit, mainly because we will call out a couple of references and a couple of static files that we want to include in our assembly in one of my demos later. So you might see me go in and customize this. This again allows us to do things like, the main item groups you're always going to see is your dependencies. Hey, I depend on ASP.NET. I depend on, DEFA or NAP, NP SQL or whatever, right? These are the things I need in order for my system to build. So again, that depends on what dependencies your app has. So if your app is a SQL-based app, you likely have some SQL drivers and things like that. If your app is a Mongo one, you would likely have the Mongo BSON drivers and stuff instead, right? Your app wouldn't work without those in that instance, so, we list them there. Again, if you have static content you want to compile, I think I have an example where we actually include some PowerShell scripts in the assembly. You would need to actually add them because by default, the compiler will strip all that stuff out because it doesn't consider it application code. And then you're like, no, I was looking for that. I needed that file, right? So we'll have to add them in and say, include this path in the assembly. So this is what a legacy program.cs kind of look like. And again, it's not particularly complicated, but it's a lot. When you look at it the first time, you're like, that's a lot of keywords, right? We got using, namespace, class, static void, whoa, right? I assume console write line makes sense to most of you. Yeah? It's funny because when I get to the control flow examples and show you how similar they are, you'd be like, whoa, did you just rename one from write output to console write line, right? What's going on here? And again, even when you don't see these in a modern .NET app, they're still there. They're inferred. They're implied, if they don't exist, in like an individual file at a project level, right? We'll get into that more later, right? Using is like our requires bang at the top of our PowerShell stuff. Like if I require another PowerShell module to be installed, this is what using is. I'm saying I need this library, right? Everything that happens in this file doesn't actually work if I don't have that library, because I've made an assumption that it was there, right? So that's what the using thing is. Again, .NET these days has the concept of global usings as well. So rather than me having to put that in every file, I could put that in one place and say, my project has a global using on this, and I never have to write it again. The namespace, and again, that's changed a little bit in modern versions of .NET Core. This is more of a project structure thing, and kind of how we kind of think of this how when you write a module, you have your private methods and your public methods. Namespaces allow you to kind of start carving stuff up and saying, hey, this stuff here is only available to this other thing. If they're not available anywhere else, you can set I actually don't have a public keyword here, which is silly. I should have put them in. You'll see accessibility identifiers before the word class and before the method a lot. So this might say public class program, and it might say public static void, that kind of thing, right? Those accessible modifiers allow me to say, hey, these methods can only be used internally. These methods can be, and there's more than just two, right? It's not just internal and external. There's a public, private, internal. There's like 6, I think. What would you say? Protected. Yep. And there's a few others, and it's really about what level of the assemblies can access them, right? And again, from a secure coding perspective, which this is not a talk where we're going to go deep on secure coding. Trust me, I can teach you this stuff in 4 hours. I can't teach you how to do it securely in 4 hours. We're going to take a lot of shortcuts. But yeah, so that's your namespaces help you to structure up your project, stuff like that. You could put certain, hey, this is stuff related to this particular thing. Cool, put it in its own namespace, right? Now, again, in modern versions of .NET, we have file scope namespaces, so you don't necessarily need to describe that. We'll just assume everything in the file called Hello Summit is in the namespace Hello Summit, right? And we don't actually need to call it out like that. We can also here is the old version. You see how it's encapsulated, right? Namespace, Hello Summit, open curly, close curly down the bottom. I would just do that more like a using statement now. I would just say namespace, Hello Summit, colon, right? Semicolon, yeah. And then I wouldn't think about it again, right? So the cool thing is I could then drop that in multiple places and say, this is part of that, this is part of that, this is part of that, right? But as you can see, nothing too crazy. I mean, we'll touch on this stuff a little bit later, but the static void main thing is specific to CLI in this thing, so we won't dig into that too much. Let's jump into my first demo before you get bored of listening to me, because we got hours of this to go. All right. So by hand or by C#. We are going to do this quick and dirty and you feel free to follow along. I did adjust the flow of this a little bit. I'd set it up originally as a nice follow along thing where we can all do this. But given it's the afternoon already and there's no power anywhere, I wasn't sure I could rely on you guys actually having battery. So props to all you Mac M processor users. Or anyone got them cool Snapdragon Windows laptops? Anyone? No one's got the new ARM Windows, huh? Are they that underwhelming? You guys are a quiet bunch. You guys ate lunch. Come on. This is digesting still, huh? All right. Let us try and do this by hand then. All right. So the goal here is to we're going to do this from scratch. All right. So let me make this bigger. Is this the screen you guys can see? Okay, so that just means I need to hit escape in PowerPoint. That should turn off the projected display thing. Now can you see? Okay. It's a cool feature. I love that I don't actually need a second monitor. Like when you put PowerPoint now into like, slide mode, it pretends there's an extra display, and I still see the presenter mode, even though you're seeing just the slides. It's great for me, but I sometimes forget that they're now different because there's only one screen. So it's let's drop back to Scratch. Nah, that's too much. All right, so we've got two files. They're both empty. So here we're going to do a console write line. And then this is, oh, that's a good point. Thank you, Missy. I really wish it would just make my text bigger and not the whole damn thing, but electron for the win, right? Don't need to see that. All right, this one I'm going to try and steal from somewhere else just so I don't have to write all the lines down. And we're actually going to tweak this. Like I said, we don't actually need it to be web. I don't need a reference there. I don't need this here. I think this should be fine. So, excuse me. All right. So if that works, oh, we broke something. Oh, there we go. That's what I get. The compiler infers an awful lot, but not that. Or that. What else doesn't it like? Oh, I missed something when I changed this. There is another keyword I need here. Something like exe somewhere. This one. That's not helpful. All right. Let us now try again. There we go. Okay. For those who can't see. All right. So that's an interesting command, .NET Run, because an incredible amount of work just happened on the computer just for me to say hello Summit to you. I probably could have done that way quicker in PowerShell, right? It's true. Now, the thing you got to think about with PowerShell is, though, PowerShell assumes an awful lot, just like I'm assuming an awful lot today here, trying to teach you C# for 4 hours. When I'm running this as a .NET command, it's doing a bunch of clever things with just-in-time, intermediate language, SDKs, assemblies, runtimes. It's doing all that just to figure out how to print those, 15 characters to the screen. It's quicker to do in PowerShell, but I have to make a bunch of assumptions. PowerShell has to be present. I have to be actually in a PowerShell terminal, right? And that's cool. Those are the trade-offs we get to make as an operator. I might have PowerShell up and running. I'm running commands left, right, and center. The cool thing is I can run a couple of special build commands here with special flags. I can now run this on a machine that doesn't even have .NET installed, and it will still run, right? I could run this on a Mac, Linux, Windows, Android, right? And it will still run, assuming I use the appropriate build flags for the executable, for the binary, right? And that's where some of the real cleverness comes down and why this is another useful thing for us. Anybody support a lot of Linux servers? Anybody have to support Linux servers that they're not allowed to put PowerShell on? Okay, almost as many, right? Because it is what it is, right? It doesn't come out of the box on many Linux distributions. Any? No, I think it doesn't. It comes on one now, I think. Maybe Ubuntu, I'm not sure. But the challenge is we can't always make the assumption that PowerShell is around. But if I can bundle PowerShell in C# and I can build C# in a way that it can run without .NET anywhere, well, that means I can run PowerShell anywhere, right? Kind of. We'll get to that later. But that's one of the cool, bridging kind of techniques that I think is useful for us as scripters. We already have a portfolio of scripts. We already have a portfolio of assets that we've created that are useful to us. Being able to wrap them up and present them slightly differently by incorporating them in not what would necessarily be considered the best way. Like I think a lot of C# developers would be like, why on earth did you do it that way? And you'd be like, well, I did it that way because it saved me rewriting 10 years of PowerShell scripts, right? You can start pruning them out and changing them piece by piece as you get more comfortable with new languages. But if you don't ever need to, why bother? You've already built the assets, right? And as we all talked about earlier, it's not like it's particularly difficult to take an asset now and say, Mr. AI, help me turn this into a Python version. Help me turn this into a, Bash version, right? All right, so that was our first demo. Quick and easy. Not too much to think about. I'm back here. All right. All right. So we just built a .NET. Well, I say we. I think I was the only one that followed along, right? Yeah. Okay. .NET app. Here we go. I got my notes somewhere. All right. So what just happened there when we clicked .NET Run? Our single console write line command was transformed into intermediate language, was compiled by the .NET SDK into a platform-independent binary, and then just-in-time compiled by the runtime into native machine code for this ARM64 Mac. So that would have actually been a slightly different process if it had been running on a Windows machine or an ARM32 device or something like that. And that's kind of one of the big powerful capabilities of .NET is that it is so kind of, ubiquitous. It will run anywhere and it will do all these things. And all that work has already been taken care of. Now, the really cool thing for us is that means we can be sneaky with PowerShell, which we like, right? All right. So on to part 2. Same, but different, but still same. We're going to walk through some control flow examples here just to kind of highlight how similar they are. And again, some of them have been, you're going to feel like they're annoyances going, man, I got to change that to that. And then they're going to realize that the way C# does them is the way pretty much every language does them. So it's not a bad thing that you have to learn a different way of doing it, regardless of which direction you take your software journey. This is how most things are done, all right? So let's look at like 4. Nothing too major here, but you'll notice honestly, I should have done a better job of formatting the PowerShell to look more like C# because the differences look a little more pronounced. The only real difference here is obviously that we don't define a type in PowerShell, right? We put $signs for variables, and that's fine. And we use the LT instead of the less than, right? That's pretty much the primary difference here. You'll notice everything else looks almost identical. You'll see the string interpolation here looks a little different. There's actually a couple of different ways we can do that depending on how many things we're trying to turn into strings. And again, anyone who's done PowerShell long enough knows that that can be painful enough regardless of language, right? Different versions of C# have introduced new ways of supporting that, right? So for each is another pretty simple one. I've called out an interesting use here because one of the things we do a lot in PowerShell is we do this kind of, inferred kind of range type concept, right? Hey, for items, 1 to 10, do these things. In C# that would not work. However, if you add a using statement and use the linked library, you would then be able to use this enumerable range extension here, right? And that would allow you to do that on an enumerable object. Again, you'll notice we have to, declare our variable type, right? So we don't know what type item is at this point. Excuse me. Right? And so because of that, the var keyword, also another newish C# keyword, it means it will figure out what the variable is. I don't actually have to tell you what it is, which does make writing the code a lot easier. I would, for most, if I was working with a bunch of PowerShell stuff, that would pretty much always be a PS object, right? But in C# it could be any number of custom classes that we've got, but we don't actually need to know what it's going to be when we break it down. We could just use the var keyword now. All right, but again, as you can see, there's not a ton going on here. The only main difference in this one, again, other than kind of formatting, is the fact that the range work we have to do using a different library. If else, these ones are. This one I did try and change the formatting of just because they were so different in size, it just looked silly. So I changed the formatting on this one just to kind of get the point across. Again, the differences we see here, C#, we have to define the type. This is of type int. This is of type I don't care. And we don't use -GT. We use the greater than symbol, right? That's it. That's the max amount of thinking you guys have to do to start C#. What's up?
Do you have to put squiggles on the new line?
Do you have to put... That's a style convention more often than not, even in C#. I think I could put the squiggles on the line above. C# style is generally on a new line, where I think PowerShell is not normally on a new line, right? And that's why my examples, because my formatters in both my languages are set up for best practice. So all my PowerShell examples, my VS Code was fixing them every time I tried to save them. And so this one I had to edit by hand before I took the screenshot. But I don't think in this instance, I don't think C# will yell at you for putting them up here, but your peers might. And again, that's another thing about any language, the transition to new languages is, it's mostly syntax and ecosystem work, right? Well, because you don't need to learn control flow again. You don't need to learn about classes again. You don't need to learn OOP principles again more often than not, unless you're moving to OOP for the first time, right? What you do need to learn is how my language does these things, and then also the ecosystem. Like, we got any Python coders here? Who write Python? Yeah, I mean, one of the big headaches getting into Python a lot of times is how to actually use your Python stuff. Like, what do I use to structure my project? Where do I put my Python files? Like, what you know what I mean? And how do I do this? And we learned all that hard stuff for PowerShell when we started our PowerShell journey. When you're making a module, this is where the files go. This is what you call them. This is all these conventions exist for a reason, and it's mainly so that the skill set you build is useful in a group setting, but also transferable. If you put a module out there, other people will be able to work with that module. They won't have to kind of figure out what was going on in your head, right? And in software, there's a lot of patterns and practices. There's a lot of kind of historic reference. Some of it, and that's another reason C# can be so hard to learn, even if you're using AI and stuff. C#'s been around a long time. There's blog articles from 20 years ago on it that might answer your Google searched question. The problem is that answer is not particularly useful to you anymore. And so you need to kind of start getting more and more scoped because you're like, well, I actually need the answer based on .NET 9. Oh, okay, that's a completely different answer than what it was yesterday, right? Because you had to scope it in more. And while, again, hopefully this is hitting home, there is really not a ton of syntax difference between C# and PowerShell. Once you understand the key differences, and one is you have to be picky about types, and one is we use proper greater than and equal than and less than signs, right? As you can see, not much difference here either. Same string interpolation stuff going on here. Again, we can do clever things here on both sides if we're trying to do anything too complicated, right? Any questions so far? You guys are a very quiet bunch.
Semicolons are mandatory?
They are, yes. And apparently the compiler can't figure out when I don't put one in a one-line file. So the compiler does care a lot about those kind of things because it makes a lot of its decision-making based on it. So those are the things you can't just forget. And like in languages like JavaScript and stuff, they're optional. So people treat them more as a style thing. But in C#, the compiler will blow up at you if you don't put them in, right? There may be some overrides that you can set to kind of do, but I don't think so. And honestly, it's good practice to be reminded that you did bad. Like I just did in that wonderful demo earlier. All right, let's jump into our second demo. How are we doing for time here? All right, doing good. All right. Well, feel free to throw more questions up as we're going. I tend to like more interactive sessions, so I kind of keep a lot of ebb and flow in my slides for that. So if you got things, hit me. But all right, staying classy. Now, classes are one of them interesting things. I'm not quite sure why classes got the rap they did in PowerShell, but that's one of the first things we've got to overcome if we're going to move to C# or any language that's OOP, because in most OOP languages, a class is everything, and everything is a class, right? So we don't get to play classes, yeah, they kind of don't work, so we don't really, you know what I mean? We can't really do that in most languages, certainly not C#. So let me get into this demo. Do I want to do this from scratch? All right, here we go. All right, you see it again? Okay, good. All right, so I did put a pretty decent README up for this one already. These will all get, like I said, it was originally designed to follow along, so these will all be up on my repo at some point by the end of Summit, and I'll make sure that links are available. You guys can follow along at home at that point. This is our class demo, so let me just open what we already have here, and I'll kind of, rather than build it from scratch, we will just go and walk through it all. All right, why are you messing with me? There's a box somewhere. All right, look, I made you all a pretty README and everything. Look at that. All right, so here we actually have a class CLI wrapper here that's kind of just to prove a point. But one of the first steps for first benefits, I guess, for C# for us is that anyone ever had to load an assembly in PowerShell from a C# DLL and then use it, right? That's a great use case for, hey, I threw something together quickly in C# because there was already a bunch of C# libraries for it and it was easier to wire that together. Now I just want to use it in PowerShell, right? Because I can't necessarily just use it in C#. I need to build a CLI app, or I need to build a web app or an API or some other way to consume that kind of class's functionality. But PowerShell can be that app, right? I can just load in my assembly, reference the DLL, and start invoking those things, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just show you what we got here. All right, so we've got some pretty basic stuff, right? Yeah, this one has a different hotkey. Of course it does. Like, where is my make bigger? I'm gonna have to go find the menu. Why on earth is it that? Okay. No, that's not what I wanted. Yeah, maybe there's a text size or something. Zoom.
Increase font.
Oh, you found it? Where was it?
Right below the bottom.
There we go. Thank you, thank you. Oh, so I was missing the shift key. All right, cool. I was like, which is weird because now I'm pushing the hotkey and it ain't working either. So, which is weird because it's doing something with that view thing now. So, I don't know. Let's try it from there and see if it works. Yeah, so that worked, but the hotkey doesn't work. My shift key just wigged out. Yeah, well, Max. I know, right? I should switch. Also, I think that's a lie.
I've never seen this on Windows, but I have seen other problems. So.
All right. I love how I've got to go to the menu each time now. This is very efficient use of my time. All right. So we have got a single file here. You notice it's still got the default name, class1cs, because the compiler doesn't actually care about the file names more often than not. They don't mean anything. They're OS-specific things, project structure things. It doesn't care about any of that. What it does care about is the structure of our CS file, right? So CS file is a C# file. That doesn't mean it's a class. A lot of people sometimes think that. The other types of C# objects are not named in different files or anything like that. So CS, C#, is that a question? Or? Oh, so we got our namespace here, classy, and we've got some properties here. So this is how a class is defined, right? So why don't I just make a new one anyway? Just because I think it might be a little easier to read if we do it side by side. So let's actually name this what this should be. This is going to be greeting.cs, right? Yep. All right. Why didn't it know? Because I've already got one called greeting. All right. This is greeting 2. There we go. And let's go and view this side by side. All right. All right. So the first things we've got here are what's called properties, right? So these are, again, your C#, your PowerShell people, so you know what properties are, so I'm not going to go too in the weeds. There's a bit more to them here, obviously, from that strongly typed thing in C#. We have to be a bit more rigid in what we define here. So we talked about that accessibility modifiers earlier, right? This is a class with accessibility modifier public. This is a property that is also public. This property is a type string, and it's called salutation. And it has a getter and a setter on it. And again, we'll get into that in a little detail. This is usually pretty easy to type out. I think in most IDEs, if you type prop and hit tab, right, you'll get to the basics. So we'll type string here, right? And then we'll type, what do we call it, salutation, right? And then we do that again. Ooh, on a new line. All right. So those are properties. These basically give me, bits of information on my object when it's instantiated, right? So class is basically the blueprint, the representation of an object, right? So in PowerShell, we tend to default a lot to just everything's a PS object, and we just shape that PS object however we want with things like node properties and stuff. That's kind of what we're doing here, but we're really defining the blueprint for that class. I would then go and instantiate this greeting2 object, not a PS object or a PS custom object, right? And so again, each one of these would be different. If I wanted greeting2 to be different from greeting1, like maybe instead of salutation, maybe I call this, message, right? I can, right? These two now are two different objects, two different classes. They would be built differently, etc. We then down here you'll notice that we now have also publicly accessible. These are called methods, right? So properties up here, methods down here. You'll notice methods have the parentheses around them, right? These ones specifically are the same name as the class, right? These are called constructors. And again, when we think of our blueprint, needs to have a how does it self-assemble type thing. If I'm to create a new one of these, what must happen, right? So we have constructors. In this example I give you, I'm actually giving you three. Yeah, there's actually 3 constructors here, which demonstrates a concept called overloading, which again, I think, are most of you familiar with that kind of stuff? Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm just going to copy it then if we're all familiar with it. The cool thing is I can now provide different kind of, use cases as needed, blah, blah, blah. I've missed something.
Change the name of the constructor, creating 2.
Oh yeah, good spot. But also I think this is still there and shouldn't be. And this now needs to change because we are now message, right? All right. And here we have one last method called greet. And let's change that to, what do we say, message? Alrighty, what else we got? All right. Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of go through kind of that getters and setters thing in a bit more, right? So the getters and setters allow us to kind of define, like maybe we don't want this property to actually have a setter. Maybe we want it to, if you see this, if this object is instantiated, you can never change the value on that. And again, from that kind of secure coding kind of concept, that's often very important. We don't always want you to be able to just, having a getter and setter on everything is great for a demo like this. It's not necessarily how you would build enterprise software, right? We also have here what's called we're basically using the setter at init only. I could actually change that setter and say you can't set it ever again. There's only an init on it, which means it can be set at initialization time and never amended after that, right? So yeah, this one we do put a default on, which I think some of my other examples below assume. So let's put hey, right? All right. Okay. So yeah, and again, you can pick those getter and setters as you're building out your applications, as you're building out your classes, stuff like that, right? So again, we're not going to go too in the weeds on that at a deep level in this 4 hours, but you can be very granular as needed as you're creating your classes, right? And again, all these classes can, infer from each other, right? I could say, okay, string audience is I've created a class called greeting here, right? I could say instead of being string, I could say this is greeting, right? Of course, now I'm going to get more than a string in. I'm going to get a whole object in, and it's probably yelling at me because I haven't necessarily loaded in the dependency. But we can build that complexity as deep or as meaningful as we want. Be mindful of that. Like this is where I think a lot of people get burnt out with Java and C# and stuff as well. Is there's a lot of preaching and gospel as to what the right way to do things is, and is this the cleanest architecture? Is this the most flexible architecture? Like the fact is that's always there's always a kind of balancing act between over architecting or architecting early, right? Over optimizing, all those kind of things, and just getting the job done. And I think as one of the reasons PowerShell is so popular for us is because it helps us get the job done, which is generally what we're getting called up at 3 a.m. to do. Software developers, it's nice when they come to work 9 to 5 and then go, oh, it's home time, and they talk about how much they solved the world today by talking about whether or not you should have allowed it to be done that way or not, right? So there's a bit of that kind of ivory tower mindset. And again, especially when you go back to the documentation from 10 years ago, a lot of those behaviors changed over times, right? And that the guidance doesn't always keep up, right? So I think it's important to see that you can solve problems very quickly with C#. You don't actually have to kind of go through this massive kind of onboarding process, So let's see if this actually works and compiles now. I still have my classy CLI here, so let's actually just that should be the parent project anyway. All right, let's have a look. All right, so that's currently saying hello. So what's going on here? What are we doing in here? So we are using classy. We're outputting a new classy greeting. Okay. Right, so it's still referencing the one we had. So if I change it to greeting 2, what will change? It should change. It should change to hey, right? Okay. Well, that's interesting. Why is it giving me? Ooh, that's a good question. Because I could have sworn I had 3 constructors.
You never added the greet function, method.
Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, I did miss one of the constructors, didn't I? That's the other thing about strongly typed languages. It makes the IDE very, very quick at telling you when you've done something wrong. And I don't know about you, but I definitely suffered plenty of hours trying to troubleshoot my PowerShell scripts because the dynamicness of it is both a blessing and a curse at times. The fact that me changing that one word in program CS and already the IDE was like, dude, that's not going to work. And I'm like, that's cool. I mean, most of the times I assume my code's not going to work. But I also that's actually a good point. If I go and undo that fix, right? Let me undo that. Did it actually give us? Oh, now it's all like, well, wait, I now have all the answers to all your problems. So we change that to greeting 2 again, right? All right, so does it give me an idea? So it's usually pretty good about telling me exactly what's wrong too. Here we go. Cannot resolve, you might not be able to read this, but cannot resolve constructor greeting 2. Candidates are, and it gives me the 2 overloads that I'm allowed to do because I didn't include the 3rd overload or the base one, right? So maybe you guys saw that and that's why you knew to answer that quick, or it's a pretty obvious mistake. But yeah, it's really good to get that kind of feedback in your IDE. That makes your journey, even without AI, like this stuff's not even new, right? Strongly typed languages have very, very strong and powerful IDE support. It's one of the reasons TypeScript's so popular, right? Because JavaScript, if you can swim through the mess of the JavaScript ecosystem, TypeScript is your friend. And it doesn't help things from a runtime safety perspective or anything like that. It's still ultimately transpiling down to JavaScript. But the fact is, most people swear by it because it makes their editor experience better. And that's when you spend all day writing code, that's super powerful, right? So let's go add that back into, I just hit undo again? No, I'm going to do redo. Meh.
Someone who's not familiar with overloading stuff, but what I'm seeing is, so basic overloading gives you basically 3 different ways to call that method.
Yeah, exactly, right. So we're basically saying if I create a method and so they all have to have unique signatures. I couldn't have two. So this is what I mean by a signature. This signature is nothing. This signature is a single string. This signature is 2 strings, right? I couldn't have 2 single strings, one called audience and one called Sal, because the compiler's like, I don't know which one you're trying to fill in I know if you give me a string, I'm going to go down this route. If you give me 2 strings, I'm going to send you down this route, right? Exactly. So, and again, if you look at a lot of the libraries included in like the operating system, some of these things have like 30 different overloads, right? And it's great. It gives you a lot of flexibility and power in reusing that code, and that's the real power of software, right? Reusability. That's why we write modules. It's why we write scripts, so that we can ultimately make them as flexible as we need, so that we don't have to rewrite them every time we need to make a minor adjustment, right? So if I change that to greeting 2 now, so this one should say what? Hey? Oh, well, that one didn't work. What did I screw up this time? What didn't it like? Oh, namespace. The type or namespace greeting 2 does not exist.
When you're reading that CS or the class, greeting to, you said classy dot, so greeting to dot. So your program CS should be classic, should be greeting to dot.
No namespace is
No, it should be class. It's the namespace.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there.
Because you don't have brackets around the namespace?
I'm thinking it might be because they're in separate files. It might be kind of doing file-based namespace, and it's probably causing me some grief. So what I'm going to do quickly is actually it really shouldn't be. That's good.
But your classic is greeting to.
Right. So we're referencing.
New greeting to is a classy.
Well, and that's why it's grayed out for the most part. It doesn't actually care about that too much. But that's unlikely to change anything. Yeah. Because like that's why my ID had graded out anyway. It's like you don't actually need that in here because I've already inferred it. But I want to know, cannot be found, missing user directive. Let's cheat a little just in case I've let's call it class C2. And then here we'll go using class C2. Still give me an error, but everything's lit up. This is what I get for tweaking my working code on the fly. All right, well, this is underwhelming.
Would it be classic C#? Based on your file structure?
It shouldn't. No, like I said, the file, it doesn't really care too much about like class 1 or greeting CS. Like neither of those things are causing it any grief. Now, and the fact I'm not getting any errors on the page here either is nope, that's fine. Oh, and that's all based on the README. Don't care about that. Well, I'm not going to spend too much longer trying to troubleshoot it if we can't figure it out. If I go back to greeting, it's interesting how it instantly knows which one I'm using, right? Like the ID's figured that out. Let me double check my references here, just make sure. Okay. You know, I'm wondering if behind the scenes it didn't actually rebuild the class. So the way the references, the way I first built this, the references are. So if we go to a CS proj here, right, for the CLI, and we can just edit that from here, edit. Right, so let me kind of make this a little bigger for you. Right, so you'll see here we've got a hint path to where class E is. Right, so it's basically already looking in the libbin debug folder. Right, so that DLL is already being compiled. So if normally the project itself should have recompiled that, but if it's not considered a project reference, it won't treat it as one solution, right? It's gonna, oh yeah, it's a different project, someone else's concern. I think it's because I didn't actually go and compile the updates we made to the library first. And again, I don't go into solutions at all in this this talk, but in the .NET ecosystem above project, there's a concept called a solution, which is how you structure a bunch of projects that have to play nice together, which again, clean architecture and stuff means you'll run into that quite a lot, but it makes a 4-hour talk kind of challenging. That's probably what was hitting us there. It hadn't recompiled that DLL, so those changes we just made didn't show up in that new DLL, right? So there we go. Changing that looks like it kicked that off again, right? So here's another interesting thing though. So now what we can do some clever stuff here, and I wanted to say I had some code in the README here because I always forget it off the top of my head. Oh no, maybe I saved it for a later demo, but let's try it anyway. All right, so I'm now in PowerShell. Make that a little bigger again. All right, so DLL path equals, that's not gonna work. What? Let me go into lib bin debug net9. Now let's do that DLL path. All right. Now I'm going to come out of that directory so you can actually see what the hell I'm doing. All right. So what is it? Reflection assembly. All right, so we've now just loaded that DLL into PowerShell. And so now, I can remember this syntax off the top of my head. What is it? It's going to be classy, no, classy dot greeting. Why isn't that working? Come on. Who does more PowerShell than me? Why can't you? Let me try greeting 1 again. Okay, so new works, but 2 still doesn't. Oh, because we changed the namespace, didn't we? We changed it to classy2.greeting2. All right, so then that should say hey, right? There you go. So I'm already using that library we created in PowerShell, right? And again, I used it in a CLI already. I've used it in PowerShell. I could just as easily wrap that up in a web API or a web socket or a bunch of different ways of doing it, right? So I've made that code flexible by building it into a library, right? But that's a C# library. That C# library can be used more places than just a PowerShell script, right? So that's the classy demo. Hopefully that gets the point across about classes and objects, at least at a high level. Any questions? You quiet bunch? Hey, okay, we got one.
So would this be a better way, if I need to implement a class in my module, instead of using the PowerShell, finding it in PowerShell, is this a better way of doing it?
So yeah, generally when I start getting anywhere with classes in PowerShell, I generally just go and write a library. That's my way of doing it, just because classes have, and again, there's probably some way deeper PowerShell folks here that could talk about the whys behind it, but classes in PowerShell didn't seem to get that first class treatment. Like they've been around since C#, since PowerShell 3, right? But there's always been this like, don't use them, except for this, don't use. And I never quite understood why. I think a lot of people get frustrated by it. So this example here, if I was to go and rebuild that library right now, this referenced assembly is to a library that firstly now no longer exists because I just deleted it. I think that's where a lot of people get hung up on it. When you start loading in a library to PowerShell, well, you've now locked that DLL files in use. So now that's in my, that's the one that debug folder is the one that gets built. So if I was to try and run .NET Run now, it'd be like I fail because your DLL's locked, so I can't override it. And I think that's why people just tend to get a bit frustrated with classes. The same thing occurs, right? I write a class, I go make a change to the class, but PowerShell's still looking at the old version of the class. Even this is the PowerShell classes specifically, right? And people are like, okay, well, what do I have to do? I have to close my terminal down completely to kind of refresh all that. And it slows down that work kind of thing, right? So yeah, I tend to just, cool, I'll just go and write a library. And once I'm happy with the library, once I built some tests for the library, now I'll go use it in PowerShell whenever I need it, right? I do think, I'd love to know a bit. I mean, if you're in the Don's talk tomorrow, where he talks a bit more about, what's the book? Shell of an Idea, right? Yeah, because there's a good chapter or two in there, I think, where he talks about some of the class stuff and some of the challenges that went on when they were bringing it in and incorporating it, right? But there's always been that historic overtone with classes in PowerShell, and I've never quite understood why, because obviously PowerShell is very class based. It cares about objects. Everything is an object in PowerShell. It's one of the reasons I talk to people about PowerShell even on Linux and Mac over something like ZHS. Like, everything's text. I was like, cool, man, and not everything in my world is text, right? I love objects, and coming from Windows historically, before I started using Macs regularly, I've felt at a disadvantage whenever I was like, it's cool that you can process lines of text really quickly, but I don't process lines of text really quickly. I like to work with objects that I manipulate and things like that, right? So yeah, I tend to just write my libraries in C# now if I need that kind of complexity. Again, it also gives me a bit more reusability, and again, it's a skill set that just very versatile, right? So, good question. We have some others? No? Quiet bunch.
It's kind of unrelated, but what extension are you using in VS Code to manage your C#?
Oh, this is actually Rider. So Rider is the JetBrains .NET IDE. It is free now as well. They kind of made it free for non-commercial use earlier last year, I think. It is interesting because I was a big VS Code fan when VS Code was new, and then before I retired, I had to work with teams that wrote Python. I worked with teams that wrote Terraform. I wrote with teams that write documentation in Markdown, and honestly, my VS Code just became so fuzzy that it just wasn't the best experience for me. So no, I mean, the VS Code C# dev kit also has never quite done amazing things for me. It's come a long way over the last year, but I'd already, like I said, I pay for Rider these days, so I got comfortable with it. You do not need full fat Visual Studio anymore to do C#. The dev kit in VS Code is fine. As you can see, you could just use Notepad like we did at the beginning. Don't. Rider's another very popular option in that space, and it's Rider is just C#, right? WebStorm is just JavaScript, right? And then they've got ones for C and PHP and Java, I think, is their famous one. IntelliJ, that's kind of their pedigree. They are moving towards a more kind of unified platform as well. Fleet, they've been working on it for a while. I'm not sure if that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing, because it's kind of nice that I can close all the stuff I don't care about when I'm working on a C# project. The only time this trips me up is when I'm writing something like my front end might be JavaScript, my BFF and my back end might be .NET, and now I'm like, okay, I've got two Rider windows and a WebStorm window, and I was like, okay, maybe I should go back to VS Code. So again, I use them all, as you can see. I think we threw up code at the beginning as well, so I still jump around a bit, but my code is not really configured for my C# workflow, so I didn't want to do it for most of my demos. But good question. Come on, once we get one out, we usually get more. Yeah.
Yeah, quick question. For you or for anyone in the audience, as someone who's PowerShell and looking to, not necessarily looking into another language, but I've definitely asked that question. Is it worth it to get into C# and .NET? Is it worth it to get into Python for certain things? What is an example, or can you go high level kind of example where I would want to use a custom class like we just did in PowerShell? I've never needed to use one, even in the PowerShell tooling. But I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around, hey, what's an example? I haven't run into anything where I'm like, oh, I wish I needed the class, but I don't really come from a strong OOP background or anything like that. So what would be kind of an example? Other than I use PS Custom Object a lot when I need to just throw things together. But what's kind of an example?
No, I think it's a good point you make, and I think it's one of the reasons that it's not necessarily as instant a click as to why I should do it this way, because if you don't need the strong OOP mindset in PowerShell, which is one of the reasons that makes it very approachable and adaptable, because it's like a religious war out there when you start talking about OOP and what's good and what's bad practice, right? But the fact is, if you if you do start to adopt proper OOP principles, then it becomes very obvious why you want a different class for everything, right? As opposed to, I can just bundle everything up and call it PS custom object. I was like, you can, and also you've now lost all the benefits, right? Example, I'm trying to think if I have a slide coming up here on interfaces, because that is probably a good place where they start to fit.
I kind of want to add that one reason why the hard question to answer is that PowerShell gives us tools that lets us not have to use them as much longer than we would in other languages. Like if you use a hash table in so many places or case of object in so many places, we want to reach for a class right away.
Right.
More off. So the need to reach that tool becomes much more advanced in areas.
And again, a lot of what we're doing as operators and folks who, why am I using PowerShell more often than not? Well, it's normally like if I maybe want a bunch of data to come out on my screen. Okay, cool. Well, that data's coming from here, there, whatever, but I'm not necessarily doing a bunch of stuff with it, right? I just needed that stuff to come back. So stuffing it into a PS custom object and put it on my screen in a table meets the requirement, right? That's what I needed. I'm now piping that to a CSV. Cool, job done. But that's, again, with this library now needs to work in, say, an API, it now needs to be very specific. It needs to be security minded, right? It's a class that you don't want to leak things to places that it shouldn't leak to, or things like that. Whereas in PowerShell, you're making a few more assumptions. Like, firstly, the person sitting here running this is, this person is allowed to do this. You've still got all your security protections and things in place, but not necessarily down to the code level, like if you were writing a secure app. But
for me, it's a perfectly simple answer that, because it will help me build my own API, right? That's why I came here, right? So it's like, if that's how you kind of think about it, when you want to do that kind of thing, then yeah, definitely. I know I can use Azure functions to do this, but part of what you said, I wanted to see what it's like to build that kind of skill set and see, what kind of goes into that. So if that's the scenario, I won't necessarily build my own class, but I just need a hash table. Of course.
Yeah.
But if it's something that's, want to do something.
I think interfaces, and I do walk through in the second part of this, assuming I can get everything wired up properly, I'll actually show us writing up a repository interface for something. So an interface is not a class, it's an interface. It's a thing in OOP that is more of a contract. It's a document that says thou must, right? So generally when I'm creating a class, and if we go back, Writer's still open, right? So we've got our class here called greeting and greeting2. Oh, of course not, because let's go through this slide quickly then, right? All right. So what is an interface? So an interface defines this contract, right? So it looks a bit like a class, but it doesn't actually have any functionality in it, right? So it's going to basically say this class must have a property called audience, and it must have a property called salutation, as an example. And anything else you put on it, I don't care about, but it must have these two things if you wish to inherit from this interface, right? Same with the methods. It must have a method called greet, right, as an example. Now I could build greeting and greeting2, both inheriting from base greet, right? And they would both now have to implement both of those properties and all of those kind of methods that are defined on the interface. Now the cool thing is they could then go off on their own route and add a bunch of extra functionality, things like that. As long as they meet the base requirement, other places in my code, I can reference that interface as a requirement versus the class itself. So I could say, anything can be in this list of type, this list might, now again, this is something that we kind of get around in PowerShell by just not caring too much about. So a list or an array is generally strongly typed in C#, right? So I can say this list can only have greeting in it, or it can only have greeting2 in it. But I could say it could have either greeting1 or greeting2 if I say the list is of type iGreet, right? Or iGreeting, right? Interface greeting is just the naming convention, right? So if it's now I can put greeting 1 or greeting 2. The interesting thing is the only bits I put in there are the bits that the interface cares about. I won't be able to then browse down to all those extra things. I won't be able to crawl to them because I won't necessarily understand that they're there, but it gives me a bit more flexibility. And again, that's a silly example because you wouldn't necessarily use it for something that simple. But think about how a lot of the converters work in PowerShell, right? So I can take this and I can convert it to CSV or I can convert it to JSON. That's a very behind the scenes. What's likely happening is a very simple way of saying, well, I know that these two things are both serializable through this thing, and the JSON serializer and the CSV serializer and stuff. These are probably plugging into some kind of common interface that PowerShell knows and cares about, right? In order to say, cool, you can write your own one for TOML, maybe. Has anyone done that yet? Is there a TOML converter out there? No? Maybe, right? Yeah, because some of us have to write TOML because, people were mean to us. I know there's a YAML one. There you go. That's the one everyone hates, right? YAML. So that's again those type of examples. If I'm building a platform that other people are going to extend and grow and stuff like that. And again, that's one of the things when we build APIs, we're often not just building a tool to solve a problem. An API is generally built as an API, not just an mobile app, because we want other people to be able to consume that API and build other tools on top of it, right? One of Microsoft's greatest successes is that they're a platform company. They don't just build software, they build platforms, and almost all of their early platforms were billion-dollar businesses, right? Windows isn't just an OS, it's a platform, right? SQL isn't just a database server, it's a platform, and Azure, I think, is just the behemoth of platforms, right? That's not the same as Facebook, right? Or even Google, right? Like their primary products, right, out of the gate. And Facebook tries to pretend it's a platform now, but Marketplace does not make a platform. So again, depending on what your design goals in, when you go into something, like what problem you're trying to solve, dictates what kind of flexibility and interoperability and stuff like that you want to build into it, right? So that's where things like interfaces become a lot more common. That's where specific classes become a bit more important and stuff like that. Right? But great question. But let me quickly walk through that as an example there, right? So we go back here. So we got.
Still on the slide.
Oh yeah, I gotta always remember to hit escape. All right. So this here doesn't inherit from anything, right? So the way we do an inherit, we would put a colon and then we would put the interface that it does care about, right? So let's go and quickly create a greeting. I like how the IDE's like, you want to call it this? I was like, well, I haven't created it yet, man. Calm yourself. All right, so nothing in here yet, but if we go back to our greeting one here, so now we have an iGreeting. All right, that's an error right now because is the error because there's no reference, right? I can fix that by putting that in the class E2 namespace, right? Because now they're in the same namespace, so it doesn't have to go find it, right? That's probably not the best way to do it given what we're trying to refactor here, so I'm probably going to fix that. I'm going to change this to class E1 again, and we'll solve that problem later when we come to it. All right, so everything's in the class C namespace. Now my CLI is broken again, that's fine. So now if we go down and actually fill this out a bit, so let's say, what do we want? We wanted a prop, string, and let's call it salutation, right? And then we wanted a method called greet, right? Why is it not liking this? Oh, what did the greet return? String, I think. There we go. Okay, what do you like now? Oh. oh, you know what? Yeah, this is class. I was like, why is it asking me to fill it? So you don't do implementation in an interface. I was like, why is it asking me to put in the return body? There you go. Yeah, so you actually have to call your interface because, like I said, it's not a class. So don't call it class. That's actually my own fault for when I right-clicked and went new file. I didn't actually change it to interface, so it defaulted to class. I didn't catch it. But yeah, you actually don't provide the implementation detail for greet here because you don't care about it. You're like, there must be a greet and it must return a string. That's all I care about. And so now greet 1 and greet 2 could differ down different paths as long as they provide a string, they've met the requirements of the contract, right? If we go back to greet now, so firstly, why is this now, right? Is not implemented. Okay, so I'm not sure which bit of it's not implemented. Oh, because we changed this one to message, isn't it, right? There we go. So now I got to go change everything back, which is fine. The cool thing is, even by keeping that initializing value different, these two classes now serve a slightly different purpose. I can still get the hey and the hello just by calling those two different things, but I can start saying in other parts of the system, as long as you provide me an I greeting, we're good. All right, so you could have your fun greetings, you could have your work greetings, you could have your mom and dad's coming over greetings, right? And the defaults of them could all be different. The ability to change them, the greeting to the kids, no responses allowed, right? That kind of stuff. And that's where the power really starts to come from, having your own classes and structure like that, right? Yeah. There we go. All right, so that implements iGreeting fine. And can we make this one? This one should hopefully work without any problems because it should already be fine. So now the only issue is figuring out what on earth's going on with program. Oh, well, class E2 doesn't exist, so that's fine. Let's make sure we build this. Because I feel that's what got us in trouble last time. And now let's see if the CLI runs still. Okay, so it says hey, and if I change it to greeting, will it still work? Yeah, there you go. Right? Now, of course, there's not much going on in that interface, but the fact is I could now make a greeting 3 if I wanted and make it say, hola, right? And interface is another good example. This is actually a silly joke, but internationalization and stuff is a good place where interfaces and stuff might actually work because you're like, hey, this is, it has to be of type, internationalization, blah blah blah. You're like, oh, okay, cool. This is the GB, one. This is the US one. They're different, right? But same, right? So go ahead.
So here, you don't have to specify the interface because it's only on the classes itself, right? We've made the interface on each individual class, right?
Well, we're basically saying the class inherits from the interface. So we're saying that I'm a class greeting. I must follow the rules defined by iGreeting. So if I was to go into iGreeting right now and change one of those rules, both of them would start showing up red squiggles saying, well, we don't meet the requirements anymore because you just added a new requirement, right? And that's where it can become tricky to manage projects long term, right? If you start introducing a change like that and you have a bunch of things dependent on it, this is the constant balance with abstraction, right? If you over abstract, then you create much more work for yourself down the road. But if you under abstract, it's fairly difficult to preen yourself out of that predicament later, especially if you're trying to pivot what your systems do or what your application does and stuff like that, right? So it's always a fine art to, figure out where that architectural line lies, right?
So is there ever a time where you want to write something without an interface declaration, or you would almost always want to specify an interface?
No, there's plenty of times I don't use interfaces if I don't need them. Like I said, the interface is... So the cool thing here now is, again, I can now I can now start building other parts of a more complicated app, and I can reference, I don't know if I'm going to get a greeting or a greeting too. Like, so how do I handle both? Do I just have a weird if-else loop and say, if greeting 1, do this, if greeting 2, do that? Or what if I'm supporting an unknown number of greetings, right? When you start working on enterprise software teams, you might have other teams building things, and you're not the person, right? So having clean, well-documented interfaces makes a little sense, because you're like, hey, team 2, 7, and 14, you're going to build the JSON thing, you're going to build the YAML thing, you're going to build the TOML thing. They all have to be of type iSerializable or something. And as long as they're serializable, my app can then turn, once you're all finished, my app will be able to turn stuff into JSON, into YAML, and into TOML, right? And I don't care if you finish at different times, it's fine, as long as you meet the interface, right? So the contracts often get written earlier on, right? So there's, is it break time already? Damn, apparently it's break time. Okay, there's break time apparently. What is it? Is it 15 or half? Oh, okay. Do you work here or something?
Not anymore.
All right, well, I've bored you with all the formal stuff. The fun API stuff comes next. So, so come back after break. I was hoping to at least get through. I can't imagine it's half an hour, yeah. It's just 15 minutes, right? Alrighty. So I guess we should maybe make an API?
Yeah.
Or two? Okay. So, APIs. I think we talked about them. You know what they are. You've all used them. You've all called them. So let's not do that whole do it by hand crap again. I'm going to try .NET new web. Let's just call this one API. And let's call it classy API. All right, so, man, I'm going to make this zoom in again. All right, so, so .NET new web. The O here and the N are the output directory I want it, and the name I want it. Right, because otherwise it'll just default to what I called it. So if I called it, API, it would put it in a folder called API, and it would call it API, which isn't usually what I want in my product structure. So I'm just calling those out here, just so I put it in a new folder and stuff. But yeah, the .NET CLI is a much easier way to get your CS proj files and scaffolding and stuff done. So by running that command, we got here a program CS with slightly more lines than the command line example earlier. Apparently we have a route, a map get, and that should return a hello world, right? Of course, there's an API, so now when I click run, nothing happens. I have to go now open a browser and do all that stuff. That's weird though. Oh, you know what? Has it opened? It's probably just opening something in the console here, isn't it? I feel like it should be giving me a string at this point. There we go. That's a / 5159. Okay, we'll scan on it. Oh, there we go. Okay. That's it. You've built your first API. Thanks for coming to my talk. All right. So this is a good demo, though, and why most of my classy examples earlier were based around the kind of hello world thing, because I want to show you how quickly we can extend this by adding our existing library, right? So firstly, we're going to go into our API project here, and we're going to go dependencies. we're going to go reference. Oh no, we can't actually reference. That's not going to work. Oh yeah, add from. There we go. And then we are going to find where that DLL is. There she is. All right, so we've now got our reference added. Someone asked me about the global usings concept earlier. I'm trying to think if I can remember off the top of my head. Like I want to feel I can just say using classy, right? And I think it's usually as simple as that. So we have a file at the root of our project called usings. I might have to rename it to global usings or something. I'm trying to think exactly what the file name's supposed to be. We'll check that in a second. But then I wouldn't have to reference it everywhere else, right? Let's find out if that worked. So let's say I don't want to actually return hello world. Let's say I want to get rid of that. All right, var output equal greeting2 dot greet. Doesn't like that because I'm trying to invoke a method on something I haven't created. Yeah, okay. No, it doesn't do that either. All right, I don't have all my hot reloading sorted, so we'll try this. Come on, why not working? Oh, because I'm impatient. Hey, there we go. So we've already tweaked our API with our existing library just by referencing it. And I didn't have to put, it did have my using classy up here. I wonder if I removed that. Yeah, see, so it's not liking the global usings at the moment. So let's go and, now for most of this second part, I'd intended to do it a little kind of live tinkering with you guys. But I was supposed to have a second monitor, and I realized that because this dongle shows up as a second monitor, my MacBook Air, despite all its power, can only support one of them at a time because I didn't pay Apple enough tax or something. So we're going to do this in real time, and we're going to figure it out together. So let's global using file name in this core. Anyone use Kaggy here for search? Don't tell me you're Bing people. Oh, there you go. I didn't put the global keyword in it. That's what it was. There, now it all works again. Yeah. So remember, AI can be helpful. You tend to have to know a little bit about what you're talking about before you ask your questions. But yeah, that was the problem. So in the global usings file, I assume it probably doesn't care what the file's called now. The default naming is usually usings, but yeah, if you just put the global keyword before it, it will now be inferred, in every other file automatically. So, and you don't have to configure every using to be a global using. You can say I'm going to put using, where it matters, but for certain things like this example or other things where, hey, this is our shared library. Okay, cool. So everything in this project is going to use that shared library. So I don't want to declare it 400 times. The global using is a nice shortcut. All right. So I was going to start this by going, what should we build an API on? And like, again, like play off each other. What do we want to try and represent? I was thinking after listening to the award announcements earlier, maybe we should start building a database of all the historic award winners of those cool things. But I don't want to steer the topic because that would be cheating. So what?
Brian, I've got it.
We build a database of all the award winners.
Yeah, thanks for your creativity, Corey. Really, you guys got no input. This is going to be a very boring talk if you guys don't give me better input than Corey. Fine, all right. We'll, yeah, oh, okay, an app to collect votes. Votes is good. Vote for, yeah, something for dinner tonight. Okay, could be cool. Okay.
Something to collect feedback from the session.
There's a QR code. She's not supposed to have let you out for snacks until you voted me 5 stars. My bad. Yeah. All right. So, any votes on any of those? Which one people think sounds the most interesting? The database of the speakers of the award winners. Okay. All right. Well, let's take it like that then. Let's our little chat assistant help us out here. What do we want to call this? I don't know. Well, let's start with the awards. There's 3 of them, right? So let me. Now, a lot of people would say, why bother using GPT for something like that? And my example is always like, because it types way quicker than I do. I'm sure most of you use it for the same thing. That's an awful lot of classes. I don't know if we need that many, but let's play it by ear. All right. So now, should we go and add those back to our class library? Let's not for now. Let's just keep it in the API, just because I'm being lazy. Let's just call it classes for now. All right. What did they give us? All right, so we got our award categories, because there's 3 categories, right? We got our nominations. I don't think we're only storing the winners. Nobody cares about the losers. Wait, when you guys vote, what do we do with the other nominations? Do they champion each other? Is it do they go out there and collect votes from you? Do they bribe you? How does it work? It's all done by the community as a whole, right? No? Don't we have any? Didn't we have a winner in here a minute ago? Yeah, it is just a survey, right? And then the decision's kind of made behind closed doors. It's like the academy. The academy has spoken. All right. Well, I think the award category, yeah, that makes sense. Because if I recall, a bunch of them we had the couple before last year, and they kind of were around for a couple of years. Didn't you win one of those? He's busy on his phone. Look at that. Didn't you won something back? Didn't you? Some kind of community award?
For the guy from Microsoft. He looks just like me.
Jason, you mean?
Oh,
But I'm not him.
you're not him. That's correct.
I'm not Jason.
He looks a little more. He's a little more plumber now. Yeah. I thought these were way better than that. He's like 2 rows away. I'm like, what?
Glasses make you look famous and smart.
Yeah, right? All right, well, not Jason Helmick, everybody. But play that up at the bar. Well, I'm going to send Jason the clip of this part of the talk. All right. Well, there was so Jason did win something a couple of years ago, and I think they renamed them all or recategorized them all last year or something. So this year, do we have any winners in here? Anyone? You were all in the talk this morning, right? Because I wasn't. Do you remember the categories, right?
They were named
Because we've got.
Leadership, innovation.
See, the Snova one pre-existed. The Snova one existed before last year. The other two got renamed, I think. Or one of them was newly created, and the leadership one got renamed. I don't know. I mean, you know how community awards, man. You know how it goes. Let's start with that. I think award category makes sense. ID, name, description, yeah, whatever. I don't technically think I need to set a bunch of default values there, and list probably makes sense. All right, so let's quickly walk through what's happening here. All right, so we're creating a class called award category because we already know there's 3 categories, which means we're going to have winners that can win one of those categories, but not necessarily all of them, or the same person could win 2 categories, 2 different years, whatever. So we're going to have a class called award category. The award category has an ID. I don't know how important that is when there's only 3 categories, but we'll keep it anyway. It's good practice. Anything that you're putting in a database should probably have some kind of ID. It doesn't necessarily need to be a GUID though if it's going into SQL, because it's probably just going to be a number. All right. We don't need that because we're not initializing it. And then we've got a list method. Or we got kind of a list of nominations. That don't make sense there. Why would I have a list of nominations? Nah, we don't need that. All right, so let's just have a simple class. Award categories, right? Is active. You know what? I don't even need that field there. That's it. We'll do it. All right. So, cool. Give me a post endpoint. And I typoed that like hell. All right. Yeah, should work. I think we should probably implement a repository at some point. Let's see what we got here. That's not what I wanted to copy. Where is my classes?
Classy API.
That's right. Let's see. There you go. All right. So this is a common pattern in APIs. When we're talking to a database, we create what's called a repository, right? So a repository is kind of an abstraction that lets us say, this class talks to my database. That means the rest of my app doesn't need to know about my database, right? So let's say in this instance, I'm going to use NeonDB, which is a free cloud-based Postgres thing that I use for simple things. The repository pattern is an important abstraction in APIs because it allows you to not tightly couple your API to things like your database, right? So let's say I'm using Neon today and I want to go to RDS tomorrow, I would just write up a new repository. And as long as those repositories both shared the same interface, potentially, I could now swap between them without being tightly coupled to one, which allows me to move my thing from one to the other, right? And again, you can see why I'm not necessarily typing all this out by hand, because there's a lot of typos. All right. But again, if you didn't ask the right questions, if you just said, help me wire up to a database, the GPT isn't going to help you the way you think it's going to help you. It's going to probably follow a fair few bad practices. So let's go and back into our classes, and I'm going to dump this all in the bottom. All right. We also now need to add some external dependencies, because in order to talk to Neon, we need to have npgsql, and we need Dapper normally as well. So did it tell me that at the bottom? Because I didn't really scroll that. Oh, did it?
I think so.
Oh, that's a good point. That's what I get for not being specific. Use Dapper, not EF. EF core is a little bloaty for my needs right now. All right. So we are going to need to install some things. So let's, again, in your IDE, these will be different, right? But let's go manage some NuGet packages. What do we say? npgsql, right? Is that? Oh, npgsql. Yeah, that's right. All right. Let's go add that. So again, this is like our requires. We're saying my project requires some dependencies. I'm installing them. This would be like you going install module. I need that before I can work on my new module that builds upon it, right? So I'm going to install that one. I'm going to install Dapper. Dapper is just a lightweight ORM as opposed to Entity Framework, which the words lightweight have never been used to describe. Object relationship mapper. It basically helps the system take our classes and turn them into like a SQL table, SQL entry and stuff like that, right? So a lot of those, this auto mapper is a common one that a lot of people use. Entity framework is the big ticket one. That one has a lot of advanced capabilities. It's not a bad product. I do not need that level of bloat for our demo because I don't need any of those features. It's going to let you handle things like migration. So let's say you go and change your classes tomorrow. Well, how does your database schema now keep in sync with the fact that your classes have changed, right? So an ORM helps as your app evolves, helps make sure your database also evolves with it and stuff like that. Does that make sense? A great question, though. All right, what did it say? Did it regenerate it for us? Maybe. All right. Let's go and undo this then. What? No, fine. Whatever. Just got to do it the old-fashioned way. All right. All right. Now, what issues we got? That makes sense because I didn't copy the using lines.
It did. It put it in the middle.
Oh,
Yeah, I was just saying.
okay. You're right. You're right. I need to. I just need to move them. There you go. Now the red squiggles went away. This is not. I wouldn't normally structure this in a single file, by the way. Again, it's just. That's a lot for me to try. I'm trying to not just give you a basic API example, but to show you all the other pieces that would go into it. Like again, database connection, logging. If we can, we'll try and fit some auth on, but API authentication is a beast unto itself. If we can do a quick demo with like some keys or something, just for some security-minded stuff, that'll be useful. But we'll see what we got time for as we go through and what you guys are driving me towards with the questions and stuff, right? So let's have a look. I know it gave us the the SQL as well to go and create this category. So let me just jump over to Neon. Let's go look at our tables. Actually, let's go hit the SQL editor. Let's run that. All right, so we now have a table called award categories. All right. So the cool thing is I can actually start adding records now, right? Because I can technically add them from my database. So, all right, off the top of someone's head, what was the first one called? Give me. The Don Jones Community Leadership Award. All right, and I guess technically it's the PowerShell community, right? Like that. And I'm going to leave the description blank. We'll fill that in later. Ooh, what don't we like? Oh, cool. Default, I believe, was what we were using, right? All right. So there's the first award. There was the Jeffrey Snover Community, PowerShell Community Innovation. Yeah, okay. All right. All right, and then we have the.
PowerShell Community Spirit Award.
That's right, and I always spell Sean's name wrong. Anyone got the spelling? Was it K-E? K-E-A-R-N. And that is the. Awesome, thank you. You guys are the worst. Oop. Did we get them right?
Yeah, it does ID automatically.
All right. So there we got our 3 awards now. Okay. You know, while we're doing this, let's give me a get endpoint to get the award categories. All right, so in our program CS, let's get rid of the post for now. We'll come back and readdress that later. All right, so and let's keep the API in there. And you'll notice here it also gives us something that we need to add to the program CS. Right? So we actually have to reference our database connection information, right? So let's go up here. All right, so this system, you know what? We should have probably done those two as globals as well. Global using Dapper. Global using NP like that. All right, now it is trying to get a connection string called Postgres, which it's usually called Neon Connection, if I recall correctly. And if we go back to my Neon, and you all get your camera phones out. Haha, no password. All right, so in here, we're then going to create a thing called connection strings. Nope, that is not what I want to do. Can I just paste it here? Nope. need to actually put neon connection. There we go. Nope, nah, too many key presses. All right. Oh, didn't put my silly excuse me. All right. Let's see if that maybe works. What do we say? API categories, right? Man, used to be taking a while to build this time.
It says succeeded. Almost right away.
Am I on the wrong tab? I feel like maybe it's having a hard time killing the old version then, because I should see the typical .NET, here's your port number. All right, let's try run it from scratch. See, the build succeeded, but it's having a hard time. I should see here at some point the runtime needs to actually be running the exe, thus hosting the API. So it would normally come out and say, you know, .NET is listening on port 00, blah, 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 with the port number. It's usually much quicker. I'm wondering if it's struggling to connect to the database. Shouldn't be, but that's always the tricky thing. So I get my keyword. So talk to you about what this is while we're here. So because we made this an API, it also scaffolded out two files here: app settings JSON, app settings.development JSON. Again, for those of you who've done some C#, you probably recognize these. These are configuration files that you usually do not check into your repository. These are where you can put configuration for that specific environment. So where we've got app settings.development, that would only run against the development version of the build. If the development keyword existed, for instance, the app settings would be potentially the same structure but with different values because they're generally the production ones, right? Again, we don't inject them. We don't store them in the repo, right? So that's what the file you've seen me kind of editing here. Something is not liking something. I would expect an error to come up sooner though, but I mean, yeah, there's definitely nothing running here. All right. What could have gone wrong? Let's have a look. That's scoped. That looks fine. That's scoped. Young connection. Oh, you know what? I wonder if it's because we're not necessarily running in development mode. Let's have a look at the config here. Oh no, it says development there. We should be fine. Like I said, those two app settings files will fight each other if the things like the environment isn't set. And again, this is all handled by the IDE in this case. You could do this with environment variables if you weren't using IDE. VS Code will have its own like launch profile settings and stuff that you can put these kind of values in so that you can have some fixed data. But yeah, something could just be my laptop also being weird, but that would be surprising at this point. Do I have like a ton of other stuff still running? No. This is the greatest part of live demos. Let's Let's close out the things we don't need anymore. I'm always worried there's a .NET run somewhere in the background that I forgot to close. Yeah, this is definitely misbehaving a little, isn't it? That's not particularly helpful. All right, if at first you don't succeed, try terminate. And then try kill process. Could be my own fault for trying to save us time by using a flat file for all them classes. We might be trying to use those using statements a little too broadly. Let's kill Rider and relaunch it quickly. All right, there we go. Rider is gone. Let us try again. All right, so let's do a quick bit of refactoring. Let's look in our classes file. I'm going to pull at least our repository file here out. Create a new file. Call this one as award category repo. All right, and I am going to then take these two out of here, just in case. Slap them in here, get rid of the global. That's fine, I don't need Dapper here. Alright, how's everything look now? Okay, let's try again, shall we? No, because I'm wondering if that might have been a hiccup, like if it's trying to use Dapper everywhere when it doesn't necessarily need to. That could be why it was causing some grief, but I don't know.
No, I mean, like, you still have the global hero.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, well spotted. Ooh. It's weird that it kind of was okay with it here for some reason. Like, on the plus side, I do see that we have started now. So, what did we say it was? API categories. That's pretty cool. So we're calling a database somewhere in Azure right now, and we got the values, right? So that's step one. We've already added database connectivity to our API, which took way longer than it should have. Apologize. But here's our categories. We can't post. So in a RESTful API, you have the HTTP methods at your disposal, right? So you have your gets, you have your kind of puts, your patches, your deletes, right? So we use put and patch to update and create new items. Well, we use post usually for new items. Put and patch are to update existing items. Delete, if you need me to explain that one, I can't help you. So we haven't created those endpoints yet, but we have created the get endpoint, right? So we've wired up the database through a repository. We've created the get method. Now it would be cool if we could, maybe update one of these. Maybe we do a put or a patch. I'd like to try and get through like the whole CRUD model if I can, but it's also kind of a bit repetitive showing you updates and deletes and all this kind of stuff. They're just slightly different things. But let's have a look at the repository that we got given, because I didn't pay too much attention to it. So we've got our add async. We already got an update async. So the SQL commands are already here for us to update that. The SQL's already there for the delete as well. Okay, so that actually should be pretty straightforward to wire up. Yeah, that's I'm always polite to my chat GPT. It gives me better responses. Yeah, I actually don't want to delete one of them, so let's do the update one just so we can do a test. All right. All right. So we'll need to provide the ID. All right, so you guys are familiar with how RESTful APIs are structured as well. So I'll kind of walk through here. So we've got our API, we've defined this resource as being called categories, right? So we've got categories, and then we've got kind of this filler here, the ID. So what that's doing is basically narrowing down via that repository. It's saying, oh, you want to find something that's in the with an ID of 1. And that's coupled to that SQL ID at the moment, which is auto-generated, which we didn't, I mean, it's usually auto-generated. You can override them, but it doesn't always make sense from a SQL indexing perspective. But like if we go back to here where we were running this, so we already know we got 2, 3, and 4. What did I do with 1?
You tried to create it and it failed on you.
Oh, it's like I'm going to keep the number anyway. Oh, that's rude. But this is fair because these guys would fight over who's number 1 otherwise. Okay, so this is fine. We'll put Mark Rasinovich in just to mess with Jeffrey. That's actually a great idea. We'll get the post working and we'll add the Mark Rasinovich Jeffrey Stover Trolling Community Award. Number 1. All right. So let's go and hit refresh on this now that we've got that new stuff there. And I probably won't add the delete and stuff. I'll probably just spend a bit of time now walking through what's happening and all these things. All right. So did it start or did it give me an error? Oh, it's still thinking. All right. Do your thinking. Oh. Wait. So it is running? Yeah. Okay, it's running. Cool. All right. So let's clean this up a little bit. So I know we moved a little fast there. So in the API, when we first started this, there's only like 4 lines, right? One of them was this var builder equals, and then one of them was the var app equals builder build. So this builder section is then where you can start configuring out the builder, right? And then when this app thing invokes it, it basically depends on what you've got in the builder as to what's going to come out of it, right? So the app is what ultimately down the bottom gets run. This is the API, right? And again, it's a bit more complicated than a CLI app, right? But here we basically added some sections for, we need an instance of our repository, right? And again, this is a good example of where you're going to see interfaces and concretes exist together. So we need an instance of an iAward category repository. We're going to use award category repository, right? I could also have that called Neon award category repository versus RDS award category repository, right? And then I could change those next time I do a build, and all of a sudden I've migrated to RDS and nobody's the wiser, right? Assuming they all honor the same interface. Because we're using the award category repository, it has a dependency on this Neon connection. So we're basically saying that we need to make sure there's an instance of that available because the dependency injection container cares about that. And again, this is a 4-hour C# class. I'm not going to go into the weeds on dependency injection and things like that, but it's a very common OOP kind of construct. It allows us to not necessarily need things everywhere. We basically pass them pass them into the system when the system wants them, when the system needs them, it asks for them, it gets them, right? We don't sit there going, this SQL connections are available forever for the entire lifetime of the application, always for everyone, because that's not generally what you want with a SQL connection either. You'll start hitting limitations and things like that, right? So that's what's happening there. So you'll notice here, builder configuration, get config connection string, neon connection. So this is standard C# terminology. This is looking in the configuration container, which again, the compiler is correctly figuring out that there's an app settings file, right? So you'll notice that's why these two strings are specifically named connection strings and neon connection. If they weren't named connection strings and neon connection, this would not find them, because it's looking for connection strings specifically. And again, that's kind of a common keyword, which is why it's in a method name here, right? We could have called neon connection whatever we wanted and just changed it here, right? So we could have called it neondb, and as long as this said neondb and app settings said neondb, it would work. This thing, we couldn't have changed that on the fly that easily. We'd have to start building some custom methods and stuff to make it find it, right? So that's what we did here in the builder thing. Then we started up an instance of our app, right? var app is builder.build. So it's going to go, okay, you wanted all that. Now the app's ready. What do you want to do with the app? This is where we start registering our endpoints, and we'll ignore the original one we had. We have our get categories endpoint that we had first, right? This is saying, hey, I want a list of categories, and I'm going to await the repo get all async, right? So basically, we're providing into this a repository of type iAward category repository, which we registered earlier in program CS, right? And anytime someone invokes this, right, so you notice that this is registered as a type scoped. Again, there's a couple different ones here, scoped, singleton, there's a third that's pretty common. I don't use it very often. But they all have different life cycles into how long that thing will exist in the DI container. These are not necessarily things that you should worry about this 4 hours. If you get a nice C# book, we'll go into detail in a lot more on these things. But yeah, almost always you're going to find scoped is pretty common for the API lifecycle stuff, because every request that comes in from a different person likely has its own instance of those things created and then torn down when they're done. You don't want them to be created and then sit around for the next 2 days, even though that user has never come back, right? So again, that's going to keep your memory footprint manageable and stuff like that, right? So that's how it gets pretty simple, right? It's like, hey, and you know, notice the keyword var here again, right? Because now the IDE here, it knows what categories is. Like, I don't have to put var there. I could put an IEnumerable of a water category, and that would work as well. This just means that I don't have to change the code if that changes for some reason, right? And it won't unless I change something else in the app, but it means I don't necessarily have to go and change 4 things. But yeah, if I was to, C# before the var keyword became popular, I would have had to put IEnumerable of type award category, categories equals, and then we're going and saying, hey, our repository has a method called getAllAsync, and I'm going to return to you whatever it gives me. So let's go and jump into our repository and look at that in a lot more detail, right? Because again, we got all this. So firstly, here's our interface. So our interface doesn't do anything. It has a couple of methods defined, right? GetAllAsync, get by ID async. This is standard repository stuff for CRUD, right? But you see here, this is where the interface starts making sense in a bit more detail, right? Because this repository is against PostgreSQL, Neon, right? So the SQL, the how I get all async that's SQL commands. But if I'm talking to a different type of SQL database or to a Mongo database or to a CSV file, I can still honor that contract, but the implementation is obviously going to be completely different, right? So by saying I only care about the any of these repos that meet this interface's contract, I can work with, because they're all going to do the same thing. I don't care how they do them, right? That's not my job to worry about. So that's why that's the power of interfaces and kind of multiple classes in C# versus me having to go edit my script, edit it again. But now it doesn't do what it did 2 days ago because I edited it 3 times, right? So that's the interface there. And then here's the meat and potatoes. This is the actual repository that kind of handles the SQL commands back to Neon. Now again, one of the reasons we're using Dapper here as opposed to EF is that it's a lot more simple, and we don't really need full EF core for this particular use case we talked about. But again, this is just satisfying the interface requirements. So it's saying, okay, so I implement the iAward category repository, right? And I am called award category repository. I could, for instance, rename this to Neon specifically, right? And then I'd have to go change a bunch of other things. But maybe let's do it anyway, because I think it reads better. That is half of your job as a software developer, renaming stuff and fixing all the bugs you just created. Which is why I don't recommend it full time as like a job. No, for jokes. I mean, for real though, it's a perfectly fun field. But I'm like most of you. I do software and I do operations, and the two together is like the happy place. Like, why do one or the other? The amount of software people that can't host their own apps these days. You know, they go off and they have this ridiculous cloud infrastructures because they're like, oh yeah, I just click these buttons and it all works. I was like, yeah, until you start paying for it. You know, you hear about these people. I used Vercel, and I woke up one day and got a $72,000 bill, and I was like, why'd you use Vercel? And just put it in a container and run it on your Raspberry Pi at home. like if you get burnt out that weekend, it's fine. It's just gonna run slow for people. It's okay, right? You know, it's pros and cons, right? So here we've got the methods, and the particular implementation of these methods are just SQL commands, right? So there's literally SQL statements. Any SQL people here? Yeah, a couple. So just pretty basic SQL stuff. But this is what the repository's job is to do: is to abstract that SQL to that contract, right? And again, the cool thing about SQL is it's a standard. Yeah. Okay. Which is why you need to write different SQL if you're talking to Postgres or Oracle or MySQL. Go figure. It is what it is, but that's the nature of standards, right? You know, there's 7 standards until tomorrow when we're going to come up with an 8th one to unify them all. Right? Now there are 8 standards. So the thing is, the SQL commands might be slightly different for Postgres versus Maria. So you can't actually use the same SQL commands. So you would have 2 repositories. You'd have the repository for Maria, you'd have the repository for Postgres, call it good. You know, SQL Server and Oracle with the historical differences there, you're like, man, what were they thinking? So I changed those 2 values. I'm trying to think where else we got to change them. We'll have to change them here at the top, because I called that, what I call it, Neon. All right, that's good. That might be all I needed to change. Uh-oh, it's back to taking too long to do anything. See what happens when I rename stuff? Waste everybody's time. All right, so once we've demoed this, I probably won't add the delete and stuff. What do we want to do to our API next? So we've got categories. I guess that's a good start. Oh, okay, it's working. We've got categories. We can update we can update the categories. We can view the categories. And I'm being a little silly because I know that technically we need a couple of other things that would see us implement the exact same stuff we just did in like different shapes. Is there anything specific people want to see on an API that we should implement? Yeah, I knew. Was that you, Corey? Yeah. What is it about Corys? Doesn't matter if they're Canadian or American. They're the same.
Sorry.
Oh no, they're not. They're not the same. No, authentication is a good one. I mean, I think we might be able to do some simple API key stuff, maybe pretty high level. Let's see if we can do that. Give me an API key example that uses authorization middleware. Man, that's more complicated than I think it needed to be. But all right, let's follow what it said. So firstly, we got to take a value and slap it in our app settings, right? Super secret key, I like it, very secure. Meets my security requirements now that I'm retired. I don't have anyone yelling over my shoulder about this. All right. Now, in this order, what do we got to do? We got to custom. Yeah, it's probably a little heavy for what we're demoing, like, you know, but let's do it anyway, because I want to show how easy some of this stuff is, not necessarily what all of it does, like trying to cover authentication and databases and repository and all that kind of jazz in 4 hours, 2 hours technically, is a bit of a mission. So let's just create another class, and I'm just going to call it security. Excuse me. All right. So once again, we got an interface coming up first, API key validator, and then we're implementing that interface with a simple API key validator. Has a single method, is valid, right? Notice that it looks like we're actually putting the key value here. This is the keyword it's looking for in our app settings, right? So if we go back to what we put in app settings, API key, and in security, API key. If I renamed that in either place, I would have to rename it in both, I assume, right? That's probably what this comment is telling me. Yeah, okay. All right. So now we got to register it. So that's the term you'll see a lot. Register, that's what happens up in that builder section, right? But what we do here, we're registering the iAward category repository. We're registering the connection. We're also going to go and now register that, right? Make sense so far? Okay, good. As I say, it's different words, but it's exactly the same thing we did up above, right? And now we've got this middleware here, right? So we're wiring up this middleware. Now, you see where we've got the app use here, right? So I'm going to put this right at the top. So this middleware here is basically now, this is part of the .NET pipeline now for requests that come in, right? So we are now going to look, firstly, is that endpoint or a protected endpoint? If the endpoint is a protected endpoint, we're going to actually go a few of these extra steps. If it's not a protected endpoint, we're going to skip over this and the pipeline will continue without us, right? So what we're doing is we're basically configuring that up here, saying, here's our validator, and we as the caller would now have to add a header. You all use headers in invoke rep request, right? So we've got a header that has a key of X API key, and the value will be what, my secret key or something, super secret. See, look, I'm retired. I forgot already. But right. So that is what we're wiring up here. Now again, you could change that. This is just a pretty standard industry trend for API keys. API keys themselves aren't particularly insecure, but they're not generally allowed by most enterprises these days. Most folks are generally looking for proper OAuth and user validation and stuff like that. So that's why sometimes there's a little overkill to demonstrate this because most people won't use it. But for a simple community voting app like ours, probably makes perfect sense. I don't need to sign up with your Twitter just to vote for Corey. Look, he ran off. I bullied him too much. He's not sorry at all. All right. So with that in mind, then we've got the requires authorization. Okay. So let's just copy that. I'm not going to copy this whole route. It doesn't necessarily make sense. I am, however, going to slap it on this update because there it probably does make sense. And where should that go? Requires authorization. All right. Right, because I don't want that Canadian changing the name of all the things, right? So now if we go just to the get, that's not working either. All right. So something's gone wrong there. Let's take a closer look. I think it could be this app use thing because this middleware seems like it's firing all the time, which doesn't make sense. You know what? I wonder if it's because have we. App.use authentication app.use authorization. Nope, that's not helpful. Okay, I wonder. Ooh, did we get an error this time? I think we did. Okay. Errors are useful. I can actually work with those. Please add all the required services. Oh, okay. So authorization expects me to do something in the actual build section as well. Oh, wait, that means I clearly missed something because there's no way it missed that many steps. Yeah, okay. I thought we did have this here. I'm just getting ahead of myself and trying to be a little eager. All right. I wonder if this needs to be higher up the list. But also this, because this is custom, this isn't actually necessarily using the ASP.NET middleware natively. Which is why it probably didn't have me add these two to begin with. But we still need to get to the bottom of why the authorization is not working then. All right, so we're getting this thing is triggering. All right, so let's walk through it. Did I slap this in the right place? App map put requires authorization. All right, okay. Oh, did I? Hold on. Because we're doing a custom jobby, no, I was pretty good about that copy, right? Okay. Require. Let's just ask it. I mean, as a security practice goes, it's better. It's not a bad stance to take. But now it wants me to do all kinds of funky stuff. All right. So health endpoint. Yeah. Okay. So this is all we got to do. Update our app use. Ooh, or use endpoint metadata. That's kind of what I was hoping. Oh, I got you. Yeah, that's kind of nice. Kind of like that.
So the use runs all the time? You're expecting it not to?
Well, no, the use so that middleware kicks in every time. It looks like it just doesn't really have an option for not doing the authentication stuff at this point, which makes sense when you look at it, right? So we just have this: if the key is valid, do this. Else the key's else. Exactly, right? So what it's wanting us to do is basically want us to keep. Yeah, so I think basically what we're doing is adding a breakout earlier on.
On the earlier response, it did say something. It said like middleware will run all the time, and something like that.
Yeah, well, that's the great thing because the ASP.NET, the ASP.NET middleware will run on every request that comes in, right? And again, what the middleware will do is just make different decisions based on the information contained in each request. So your request with an API key for you might work. Your request with an API key for you might work. My request with my expired API key might not work, right? My request to an endpoint that shouldn't require an API key, ideally we'd have set that up, So that's a weirdly specific thing to include, but all right. All right, so now it's saying, yeah, if we're here, skip the API key check, right? So now we got to go and now we can just do a with metadata, allow anonymous, right? So now, and this is in the old version of C#, if you were doing like legacy MVC, you would have these decorators that you could put at the top of routes. So route would be one of them. Route / categories, right? Allow anonymous, require authorization or authorized, and then tell you exactly which authorization policy to use and stuff like that, right? But again, don't have time to teach you all of that. It's also not necessarily required anymore because, all right, so we want to be able to go here, right? So, all right. So let's try that. Oh, you found.
I think that was just a suggestion.
Oh, the gray is going out.
No. Clearly, your eyes are better than mine. Okay, because I can't see 2 rows in front of me. Oh, it's still thinking, isn't it? Okay. Keep thinking.
Why does it say the build succeeded right away? Is it still building or is it executing?
No, it's probably the executing, and that also could have just been like linting. The build should be happening pretty quickly. I'm thinking it's more the termination thing that's taking the time, to be honest. Seems to be having a hard time shutting down sometimes, but yeah, the .NET build process for something this simple is pretty quick. And again, it's an extra step that a lot of us as PowerShell developers gets in our way of debugging and our way of troubleshooting, right? But at the same time, the tooling itself is so much more powerful because it's strongly typed and compiled that it's not necessarily a bad thing overall. There are definitely times where sometimes it's nice to just smash in my terminal and get immediate feedback on if something works or something doesn't work, right? The other cool thing about it this way is it does mean that each time it runs, it does a build, more often than not. Again, unless you're doing weird references to other folders and you don't build those folders. But it does mean you're kind of almost always trusted to be in a kind of clean state, right? Because that's a challenge you can run into in PowerShell. You get in the habit of just making edits on the fly. And they were like, something you did 5 edits back, and you haven't necessarily factored that in anywhere, but your terminal context hasn't changed. So it's like, yeah, I've still got that variable. Everything works. And you try it in a new terminal tomorrow, and you're like, wait, why is it not working again? And you're like, oh, because you're not actually setting that up again properly, right? Okay, yeah, I've botched something again. Or it's just, like I said, could just be Ryder messing with me.
When you build an API, do you use specific API, generators for the specification?
That's a great question. I do. Yeah, so interestingly, as of .NET 9, Microsoft got rid of the default HTML output. So they were using Swashbuckle, which was a community library, to output the HTML rendered version of the OpenAPI spec. And so they basically removed that. Those options and keywords and stuff are still there, but you kind of, they allow you to bring your own, so to speak. So you can kind of, so hopefully the community will get a bit more traction around something, because a lot of people were still, they've been using that one for so long. And so they were still going around talking about Swagger. So Swagger is actually Swagger is the name of OpenAPI spec up to version 2, which is when SmartBear basically gave it to the community. It became OpenAPI spec 3.0. Probably 5 plus 6 years now. Now we're on 3.1. But we're trying to get away from the term Swagger being used everywhere, because it's a trademark by SmartBear, right? And so, yeah, so now, you can plug in Redoc, you can still plug in SwaggerDoc or whatever that is, but yeah, you can, those extensions still exist. You can still just say, use OpenAPI. What .NET will do out of the box now is generate the JSON file, the actual spec, but it won't actually give you a UI unless you wire that up yourself. I think I might have a demo where I have Redoc wired up. I'll see if it's still in my folder. Let me but that's a good question. My previous talks, a lot of them have been on API specs and documents. So I spoke at the Automation Summit. We only had, I think, 1 or 2 of them. And that was a remote one because it was kind of in the dark ages. That one was specifically about Redoc and the Redoc portal and things like that. So lots of API stuff there. And then last year, I think I talked about it a little bit last year, I think. It wasn't necessarily the crux of the talk, but when you're talking about building good APIs, API spec is prominent in the talk. Aha. Well, we're back. Oh, okay. Now this time it potentially loaded something. Yeah, a bad key. Oh no, hold on. We only said it requires anonymous for categories, right? Yeah. Hey, right. All right. So now we can get to one route anonymously, and the other routes are all protected. It's not bad for a 2-hour talk so far. Now I wonder if here we go. I'm rusty on invoke web request, so I might just fire up Postman, to be honest, if I even have it. Do I have Bruno installed?
Oh, you want to put in the header?
Yeah, exactly. Like how do we actually, Well, I'm thinking because I want to actually maybe do a put to and update one of these things so you can see it hit the database and change and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's a lot of PowerShell, right?
It's like a hash.
All right. Well, I'm surrounded by a bunch of the world's best PowerShell people, so let's get started. All right. What do you want here? Ooh, that's a great idea. We've been doing that all blooming afternoon. Why not? Hey, give. Ooh, requesty. It's all right. The great thing about ChatGPT is it can understand my terrible writing. Hey, look, it's like, we're going to update the one. I'm like, no, we're not. We're not going to do that.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, there's a headers freaking. They made it even easier. Yeah.
All right. Gee, let's copy that piece by piece. All right, let's try just our categories first.
Change the house name.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Okay. Let's go set our. All right. The mark percentage power.
Your ID is not set up as auto increment.
Yeah, it might not go through. It's a good thing. Well, the thing is, it's not. It's still available to a put. I think. I agree. It might not work. Because it'd be like, because this is trying to do an update or something to a record that doesn't exist, right? So really, this should be a post. So I don't know if that will work. Let's try this. Let's try and change to, and let's not change the name. This is another interesting thing to see how our repository, if it's wired up right or not, because usually, so remember I talked about put and patch earlier, right? So one of them is usually used for updating specific pieces at a time, and one of them generally requires an entire record to be sent back. And sometimes, depending on how how badly you've written your software or not, if you don't read in the item first before sending it back, any value that nobody changes, you're going to send not back, and so it gets wiped, right? So that's a terrible way to do it. But it's also something you should have things in your API to catch. You'd be like, okay, don't do that. We will always read in the category first, then we'll change the 2 values out of 10 that you adjusted, and then we'll write it back, because that way we know that we've still got those. Now that's a write-heavy operation, right? Because it's a read-heavy. You've done a read first every time someone just wants to do a write, right? But that's not usually a horribly expensive operation, but there is performance things to think about there, right? So what was category 2? Was that the Don Jones one?
Yes.
So let's just change. Yeah, I mean, okay, let's just see if that works, right? Ooh, there we go. All right. That's good. All right, so we got that bit down. And then we've got some JSON there. That's easy enough. Yes, really. Yeah, well, that's another interesting thing that you run into when you start writing libraries in C# and stuff, right? So C# generally understands when it gets into like circular references. So let's say I had an object called an AD forest, and in the AD forest there was another object called a domain, and as part of that domain object, it referenced the forest it belonged to as a forest, right? If you were to just turn that into JSON natively, it would sit there and try and crawl that thing backwards infinitely, right? Which isn't ideal. Whereas C#'s like, no, I'm just referencing the same object in memory that I already have, so it doesn't care about it as much, whereas the JSON conversion does. And so C# serializer will handle that natively. PowerShells won't, because PowerShell isn't strongly typed, so it doesn't know that there's a forest object somewhere in memory. It's just looking at, what it has. So it's a common challenge with complicated JSON structures in PowerShell. All right, so we just got to change the URL on this one, right? All right.
Super secret key.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. Is that what we called it? You figured the city AI bot's supposed to know what we saved it as, but that's a great point. Oh, let's do a few quick tests before we type that. Oh no, actually, some tests that test won't matter. All right, never mind. All right, what were we at? We were at local host. Of course, you're 2 lines too high. 5159. All right, and what was our super secret key? Super secret key.
Category number.
Oh yeah, well spotted. What originated at 2? Okay, and then we're changing. Oh yeah, well spotted. Thank you. I really need to get new glasses. Yeah. I'm not sure I'm going to live that one down, I'll be honest. We'll be talking about that one for years.
Just change super.
Category was /2, right? Because that's in your put of your JSON.
What's that?
You should need the category /2 because that's actually in your JSON payload.
Well, right, but so if you look at how our put endpoint is, right? So we have down here, we have our get is /categories, but our put is specifically to we're putting to a specific record.
So you're referencing the ID in the JSON then, so you wouldn't need it in the JSON, right?
Well, so I don't need to technically change it, but let's say I wanted to change that category number from 2 to 7, right? I would be going to route 2 and then putting a new value 7. I would never be able to get to 2 again because 2 ceased to exist. Yeah.
But you can't, because lines 50 and 51 tell you, hey, the ID doesn't match.
Which is good. In fairness, you probably don't want to be messing with the IDs on your databases all that frequently anyway. But yeah, and this is the great thing about me asking the right questions. This is, remember I mentioned earlier how we should be looking for the existing record first before we update what's changed, right? So we're actually doing that here. We're saying, get me my ID first, right? If existing's null, right? Or if there's updates, send the update back, right? But don't blat out the things that don't exist. Super secret key, that's right. I guess let's just see if it works. It might. Honestly, I want to check in 2 places if it works. Let's kind of go to our database here and have a look at tables. All right.
Oh, we forgot. No, we haven't.
Interesting. So this is the first time we've used the thing that requires authorization since we got the bypasses to work. All right. So it contains authorization metadata, but a middleware was not found that supports authorization. This is defaulting to, this is weird because this is defaulting to, this is like ASP.NET. Yeah, I think I know. So this is ASP.NET security best practices saying you're trying to send a key, but we're not configured properly to use keys. Remember how I noticed we weren't actually using ASP's use authorization, use authentication because we built a custom one? That custom one is probably not wired up quite to allow this. So let's go throw that back at our bot. Right. See.
Oh, wow.
Right, damn. Nice. ChatGPT's like, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. I'm gonna get spicy. Oh, interesting. So now you're having me do this stuff. I was like, okay, did you miss that or did I? So all it wants me to do is add authorization and then use authorization. Okay, fine. I'll give it a try. So up here in our registers, we're going to do, let's go right to the top. Builder.services.add authorization. All right. And then down here, app.use authorization. Now we see if we get hung up again for another hour. Assuming this works, we'll what else should we whack on? Got some more time. So we've got some auth, we've got some database connectivity, we've got some updates and some reads. I mean, I guess we just build a UI. No, just kidding. Don't make me do that. I hate CSS. All right. So let's first see, can we get to our API categories? Yep, okay, they're working. Lovely. Let's just fire that off again. Okay. So now we're getting a different error, which makes sense because our middleware wasn't actually extending anything default. Okay, so let's I didn't see it tell us to be honest. Oh, the next domino to fall, huh? Very helpful.
You're using requires attendees. Oh, politely saying it's your fault.
Yeah, it's your fault. You now need to add completely new lines. Duh. That's not a short amount of stuff to add, right? Okay. So I did say security is was an outside use case we might make it, but fine. I see. We'll do it your way. So now it wants me to add authentication. All right. API key scheme. Fine. Sure. All right. Now it wants us to build an authentication handler. Let's just grab that. Should we just slap that in security? Whew. All right. Yeah, I just hit the hotkey for add the reference. It probably just added a couple of usings up the top. All right, so we do that. Then you want me to go and configure it again. All right. Go back to program. Is that still in builder services? Yep. Is that instead of authorization? Okay, looking good. Then we got it. Then we can go add those again. All right, fine. So we got our use authorization. Let's just go and do an app use authentication. All right. Let's see if the thing will restart in a timely fashion. Oh, what's that?
So the ChatGPT suggests you put something on the parameter when you do user authentication. Oh, sorry, user authorization.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So in my actual, where I put the
Line 21.
fluid validation thing.
Yeah, on line 21. Just go back to ChatGPT.
Okay. What did I miss here?
Oh, actually, sorry, no. That was for add authentication. Never mind.
The import works like this. Isn't it actually working because there is no endpoint at that here? That's
Yeah, so
it should work. Yeah.
and that works. So we want to see if maybe this works.
Oh, different error.
Even longer one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. That's a SQL.
Ah, no, yeah, this is a SQL error.
Ah.
Well, you read
No
that.
value in name. Oh. It's trying to put it something new.
No, that
Yeah.
was a column.
Yeah. Say no value in name.
Oh, well,
Like you just said about it wiping out the data. Yeah.
all right. So okay. Well, hold on though. Wait, no. So we go back to our right.
Does it expect you to put it?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So basically, even though our endpoint is doing appropriately, right? It's why it's wigged out. Yeah, it's saying no, you can't do this because that's a non-nullable field. All right. Well, that requires me to actually do a copy paste then, right? So if we go back here, this one was this one, right? So let's just copy that then, because I don't need to type all that in by hand. Let's go back here. Oh, don't need to go that far back. All right, so we want to go and add. No, this is why I hate. I'm like, "Argh." All right, let's
Backspace out the closing brace and then
where was that? Oh,
delete that brace. Yeah.
yeah.
Also, can't you just add the name on it?
Oh, you're right. I can just add it in. It's a good point. I'm like, I don't even think the white space or anything cares, but I care. Yeah. Let's go get rid of the comma. There we go.
You know,
All right. So we've redone that. Let's go and save it to JSON. And then let's go and do this again.
Oh!
Yeah, so that's a standard API response when like there's nothing for me to give you back. Sometimes with an update, you'll get the entire record back again. Sometimes you don't want that. Although let's see if it actually did anything. It did. There we go. So we now have an authenticated route that allows us to update a database in the cloud somewhere. And we did it all in a couple hours. Now, like I said, there's there's a lot of writing here that we didn't necessarily want to write by hand because you wouldn't have got through the 4-hour talk, right? So it's one of the reasons I didn't want to write all this by hand. But when I realized we couldn't do the kind of follow along thing quite so well without power, that was kind of my pivot this morning to try and make it all work. But we got a little bit of time. Let's focus. I don't think we should probably maybe dive into anything too random and new, given there's only 30 minutes left. But let's do some QA. Okay, I assume plenty of people got some questions, want to know where they start, how you kind of get, where we at.
The difference between a patch and a put.
Yeah, it's a great question. So a difference between a patch and a put from an HTTP method perspective. So they're both updates. And like I said, one will generally update a piece. And again, it's more nuanced than like there's like a standard that won't allow one or the other. Puts will generally say, and I can pull up the actual HTTP kind of verb dictionary, right? Because I always get them mixed up which one's which. Put is basically what generally wants you to send the entire record back. So like we were talking about, like if hey, there's I've got 10 fields, you can't just send me one field. You can't just send me top description, right? Whereas one of them will let you do that and figure it out, right? So that's usually the difference between them. And again, most good APIs will support both because they do get used differently by consumers. That's another thing about building APIs. Remember, you are building a platform for other people at that point. And even if that other people is just you and your team, that's fine. But you're building something in a way designed for other people to build upon. So things like documentation matter, stuff like that. And that might be something we can squeeze in quickly, actually, was that redoc example. But keep firing questions at me. I'm going to see if I can pull up one of my funky other demos before we run out of time completely. So, but I'm glad that worked. All right. Ooh, but we got some issues internally. Okay. Something, or maybe that's from the error. Okay, that's fine. Let's close that one up. But yeah, I mean, I think the other cool thing with .NET being you can embed PowerShell run spaces within .NET apps, right? So let me see if my example is here and working. All right, so this is a CLI demo, it's not an API one, but I did, I can potentially put a couple of others together for you guys. But see what's happening here is we're referencing the system.management automation library, which is using, I think somewhere under here under dependencies, we will have a dependency on. Let's find it. Right, the Microsoft PowerShell SDK. All right. So the interesting thing is the PowerShell SDK comes in versions based on PowerShell, and you generally can't reference them all in the same kind of library, right? So you couldn't have 7.4 and 7.5 in the same one, but you can do clever things with, like you just saw, with libraries. You could say, hey, my API depends on all 5 of these libraries. These 5 libraries allow me to spin up and spin down PowerShell instances of any one of those versions. And then I can do things like this. So this here is just a quick demo. It fires up a PowerShell run space, right? It opens the run space, right? Then creates the PowerShell run space, the inception there. It then adds a script, which in this case is just get process, convert to JSON, right? And then it basically outputs the results, right? And when you click play, you should just see a JSON output of the processes on the machine. Which in and of itself is not particularly clever. You're like, cool, man, I could have just done get process. You could, except going back to the topic I talked about earlier, I can do a .NET build command, say that this is a self-contained executable, include the runtime assemblies with it, and now I could run that on a Linux box that doesn't have .NET or PowerShell on it, and it would work. So again, as as a transition medium for PowerShell people into the world of software, you think about that fleet of scripts you've already got that you can't run certain places or are 400 lines long and you don't want to rewrite them. You can just do things like that, right? Let me see if I got another quick demo that I'd been working on that I never got fully tested, and I don't, not that seemed to matter today. Let's, where did I have it? I had it in OneDrive somewhere.
I have a question
Of course.
about what you touched earlier, how you could run it in Linux without having PowerShell installed in Linux, because it's contained if you build it for Linux. Can you walk maybe a little bit more through that?
Yeah, sure. So when we think of PowerShell, remember PowerShell is two things, right? It's the kind of the language that we write our scripts in, all that kind of stuff, but it's also that runtime, that shell, right? So on Linux, so if I wanted to type pwsh on Linux, I would need to have installed PowerShell, right? If I wanted to just run an executable on Linux, I can run that in Bash, right? In fact, that's a good example. So I have PowerShell on Linux, but I also don't, right? So this one, we're in PowerShell at the moment. If I exit PowerShell, we're back in Bash, right? If I go to bin debug, no? Oh, not / bin, duh. I know that thing's built. Oh, duh. There we go. Bin debug net9. All right. Whew. Okay. All right. So ls minus la psh. All right. So here's my executable here. So this is my binary. This would be a .exe on Windows, right? If I run that here in Bash, right? I'm not in PowerShell, right? If I try and do like a PS version table, it's like you're an idiot. There is no PS version table, right? Right? I'm not in PowerShell. There is no get command here, right? It's like, Ryan, you're an idiot. But if I go and do that, right? Because that one wasn't built the way I was just talking about. Okay, that makes sense. So, right, I'm trying to run a .NET app that I haven't included all those things in. And so it expects me to have .NET. It'd be like trying to run a Python app on a machine without Python. You can run Python apps on machines without Python. You have to do the same kind of things what I'm talking about. You can basically build your Python app or bundle your Python app in a way that it is self-contained. Right? Go does this pretty much predominantly and for everything. It doesn't mess around. Go is always kind of, comes with Go, right? So you don't need Go installed. .NET and Python can do that as well. Now you do have to provide specific build arguments in order to do that. And you do start to become assembly dependent, right? So I would potentially need to create a bunch of different binaries at that point. So the advantage of .NET is once you've got .NET installed, all these apps run on it, and the just-in-time kind of compiler figures out what it needs to do for you, right? That's cool because it means your app's now smaller, and you can run on your laptop, and I, as an app developer, don't have to think about it. I can go the other way, though. I can say, well, I actually don't want you to have to do that. I want to make sure that here's the 200 meg hello world file, right? Well, we joke because I'm not saying it'll be small. Like we joke, but sometimes moving a 200 meg file into my home folder on my Linux server is easy. Like being able to run PowerShell on a machine I'm not allowed to install PowerShell on, that's worth a 200 meg file transfer for me. I'll take that because again, going back to that kind of abstraction concept, I can run PowerShell anywhere, even if I'm not allowed to have PowerShell. Because remember, I'm not actually running PowerShell. I'm running an executable. I'm running for all intents and purposes, a .NET app. It doesn't actually then install PowerShell sneakily, like as a security violation. .NET itself can generate a PowerShell run space because PowerShell is built in .NET, right? The .NET libraries themselves have the ability to create a PowerShell run space, right? It's not a PowerShell terminal. I wouldn't be able to open that terminal and actually do things with it, but I can run PowerShell scripts or do PowerShell things from within my .NET app, right? And again, I think that's an interesting transition path because, I mean, I know, like, I assume you guys, like me, have tons of scripts and things that you've built up over the years, and I don't want to rewrite them all. Right? There's no, but I shouldn't necessarily feel like that's keeping me in one place, right? Because of all that vested, time and effort, right? If I can take that time and effort and use it elsewhere, let's see if we can figure out the build commands and see if we can get this to actually run without this. So what's interesting is telling me I need .NET. Like, how does it think I don't have .NET?
You run .NET --list --runtime. Do you have .NET 9?
I mean, we've been building .NET 9 stuff all afternoon.
Do you have the runtime?
Ooh. Potentially not. Good question. I also hate the way they've done .NET on Brew these days. Was it? It's like list. It's like list runtimes, right? I mean, apparently. Apparently, I do.
Turning you off and back on.
It's more of a Windows problem.
I don't know, did you have to close Rider earlier?
That is fair. No. Part of me is just wondering if when I actually built this, if the build flags I used weren't ARM64 or something, because it's specifically calling out the architecture too here, right? It's like architecture ARM64.
It says not, well, it's the other .NET location not found.
They're looking for specific for it, which is
Yeah.
because it's expecting it locally. Just because of
Well, and again, developing all of this content, I jump pretty regularly on a day-to-day basis from Mac to PC. And so it's always it's good because it helps with some of this, but then you get into little gotchas like this, and I'm like, I swear this worked the other day. But I also hadn't tried to demo it this way to you guys. I really just wanted to show the point of I don't need to be in a PowerShell prompt. It's not actually giving me an error about PowerShell. It's giving me an error about .NET. All right, whatever. It's weird given how much .NET just works fine on here that it's telling me it can't find .NET. So I do wonder if it was something to do with the build commands. And maybe I don't have or didn't bundle it up appropriately. What is it? What is it? .NET. Hold on. Let's go ask again, because otherwise I'll fat finger it 100 times. Something like, I don't know, self-contained or self-contained, okay. Oh, is it because I'm in the, yeah, I actually probably have to create a published one, that's why. So I don't, come on, tell me yeah, okay, I still only have debug, that's fine. Let's try and grab this. Give it a go. Nope, that's not going to work now. Yeah, we know. Come on. Oh, duh. So this should create now a folder next to the debug folder. Yeah, that's pretty fine. I don't care about that. They're all warnings. Don't worry about it. So if we go now into bin, so now we have a release. All right. So we now have a net9 release. We now have our OSX ARM. All right. So let's do the ls la pw star. All right. I want to interestingly, let's see if it works. It works. But I wanted to compare the size.
Yeah.
So what's that? 1396, 9696? And then if I go, oh, you get the human one. It looked the same though. Hmm. Oh, no, hold on though. Maybe, so the DLL here is 6K. Smaller. Sweet. Well, maybe I was overestimating when I said it'd be 200 megs. I'm pretty sure bundling PowerShell and .NET together somewhere is not that small. So something is awry.
You also still have all the other DLLs beside it. When you bundle it all together, doesn't it normally remove the DLL?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's probably what's doing is actually creating all the other assemblies it depends on are in this folder. But that to me is not super release. Release at some point is here's your file, right?
Is there something in the property in the CS prod file tell it to use single file or something?
Yeah, and I think honestly that's where I remember running into that as a problem, especially jumping between OSX ARM64, OSX non-ARM64, and like Windows. I definitely think there were some issues with the single executable thing and those multiple kind of. I think there was a reason I ended up stopped troubleshooting it because it was taking too long and it was derailing me. But the point is, it can be done. Build process, like everything, can be a bit finicky if you want to do clever things like that. But once you get them locked in, you're pretty good, right?
Maybe try without that last parameter, publish trimmed. Says that does some stuff to make the file smaller.
I really should just control R it, but publish trim true. Yeah. Does say single file true, right? And it says self-contained true. The it worked, so it didn't give us that error again. That is interesting. Yeah, the warnings came from the build. And there were a bunch of them, and now there are none of them. No, I remember specifically, while I was testing it all out, there was definitely some issues with it, and it might still run here because I have .NET installed, and that's not a fair representation because you'll be like, oh, yeah. I was like, no, there were hiccups. I remember there being hiccups when I turned one of them flags off.
At least one of the warnings off the trim, like they may have all just been trim related warnings before.
And I don't reference Newtonsoft JSON anywhere.
PowerShell does though.
Ah,
Did it convert to JSON?
there you go. Good to know. Right, because I like system JSON in C#. That's what we use now. Because Newtonsoft is a bit bulky, and that's good to know. I didn't know that. So PowerShell under the hood uses Newtonsoft. I didn't know that.
They used to. For some reason, I also think they have maybe started to switch to system JSON.
It would make sense because most of the .NET ecosystems moved that way as well.
But it might be a little more difficult than just replacing this.
That ain't right.
The publish folder. It said it went into the publish folder.
Oh, duh. Now you got me. Well done. 100. There's my 114 meg one, and this was the one with the trim thing removed because we technically haven't run this one yet, so this might not work now. There you go. It didn't work.
Well, I mean, it worked. It just didn't work.
I mean, what is it you Canadians say about now? Although, so all right, well,
It executed, but you got an error that you didn't get before.
you must have one of the big boy jobs.
That's why I'm a software developer.
Come on. Any more questions? You guys have been very quiet. I don't know if that's just patience or boredom or frustration. How easy does C# seem? As we close out on this jargon.
Love to see a version of this without chance of it.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you what I would do. I will get a lot of the content for that last part rewritten up so that you can follow along. Because like that, so if I show you like the markdown I had for the first half, because that's how it was all designed, for the whole thing was spec'd out like that, so you could actually all follow along. The challenge in an environment like this with such a short amount of time was, firstly, I didn't get to like email people beforehand saying, make sure you have .NET 9 SDK installed. Make sure that if you type .NET version, this is what you see. Like the things I would do before a normal class. And so it was like, all right, well, we're also then not going to be able to troubleshoot like, together. And so I wasn't really sure what that would look like. So we kind of moved it to more of a kind of interactive, we build something random. And the random thing means it's a little easier for me to. The goal was that I wouldn't actually just copy all of it over. Like I think you saw, there were bits where I was just picking certain relative elements and stuff. But yeah, it was a kind of spur of the moment decision to change the layout a little bit. They've only done 4 of these 4-hour ones previously last year, so we didn't have a ton of feedback on what worked and what didn't work. Like I came into it with the mindset of workshop. Workshop means we're all coding together, and it just didn't seem that was going to be possible with the power stuff. So yeah, I'll get it all written up and then send you, when I give you guys the repo or whatever, that you guys can actually just read the README and follow along yourselves and stuff like that. Because again, all of the stuff we showed you is pretty straightforward. And again, some of it looks bulky in that there's a lot of lines repeated in a lot of places. But I'll get that cleaned up and make sure you have something in hand. Anything we didn't cover that you wish we'd covered? I know a few people mentioned Open API. Anything that you think you would want to see in an API that we didn't talk about? You're like, hey, I came here just for this one thing, and you didn't even mention it. Resinovich, yeah. We mentioned him. It's fine.
But he didn't make it into the actual database.
He did, and I wouldn't want to hurt Jeffrey's feelings like that. He's...
I think we used custom authorization, right, instead of the default one. I was interested how the default would look like.
And that was mainly because we're using just the API key stuff, like a lot of the default author. So because we decided the key format, we decided the list of acceptable keys. That's all that really means. Nothing. We didn't change that custom. We didn't do anything weird with the middleware. If we'd been using something that we could use out of the box, like say OAuth, right? OAuth with this, it would have just been. I wouldn't have had to write that app use piece. We would have just said something like, pass this off to Azure Active Directory. Once we've got the authorization token back, we're going to make some JWT decisions instead, right? So JWT, JSON Web Token. It's like when you see the authorization bearer thing a lot of times, that's a JWT. You can actually decode it in a. Do I have a JWT? So like JWT example. I mean, none of those are examples, but thank you. I mean, in fairness, there's a lot of authentication and encryption and stuff that goes into a JWT, so they're hard to just like generate on the fly. I wonder if I have one still. Sort of. This one isn't really a full one. There's no audience information here and there, but yeah, this is kind of these codes you get back to authenticate with systems. These are called JSON Web Tokens, and they basically have a bunch of information from your auth provider or whoever's basically approving the token for you in them. And so the cool thing is that way, I don't need your password. You tell me you're Bob, and you're using Azure Active Directory to log in. I say, okay, Azure Directory. Azure Directory is like, yeah, here's the token. The token says you're Bob, and I'm like, all right, good enough for me, right? And that's one of the things Twitter developed, before they turned to dark ways, right? That was one of their good contributions to the internet was helping kick off OAuth as a standard. JWTs themselves aren't, they're used in a lot of OAuth, but they're not OAuth itself. But OAuth is the flow of authentication that generally you would want to be building in good quality APIs. They're the things that allow you to say, hey, you can sign in with GitHub, you can sign in with Microsoft, you can sign in with Amazon, that kind of stuff, right? That could be a 4-hour class all by itself just to get it wired up. Happy to pitch that some year if there's more interest there, because that's a good set of topics that I think a lot of people don't necessarily get a ton of exposure to. How many people use Entra here? Entra, obviously, yeah. Anyone Okta? Only a few? Wow. I forget this is a predominantly Microsoft conference. You should, any others? So what's the other big players? Auth0? No one for Auth0. You can tell I'm not in a developer conference. Nobody says Auth0. Okay, because that's another thing I find a bit of a gap in is a lot of API guides and stuff that nobody's showing you how to wire up with Entra because it's complex. Whereas getting an Auth0 thing or something is usually a lot easier. Like Okta and Entra are both enterprise grade identity platforms. Auth0 by Okta now, I guess, because they're owned by them. That was designed to solve a different fit. Okta bought them, but they didn't replace Okta's One or whatever the big enterprise play is that they have. OAuth as a flow and as a type of technology is fairly standardized. I say fairly because it's one of those ones that gets fluffy around the edges, like SQL, right? But again, I think integrating APIs with Entra I think is a great thing for people to do. I've been working on a couple of UI elements as well, and again, every example you see out there is like, oh, we'll show you how to do it with Auth0, we'll show you how to do it with like a self-hosted one, and I was like, that's all cool except for every enterprise customer out there that's using Ultra, right? Anyone else?
Yeah, that's really along the same lines. I know I've heard that Microsoft Azure has kind of like API management service. Have you used that? Have you heard anything about that? And would that be something you can stick in front of an API just and add that authorization?
Yeah, no, that's actually something that API gateways have a lot of value for, because it's more that you can wire it up once. You could then basically there's two ways you could solve that, because now your API, you could not care about authorization or anything and just have the gateway handle it. That's one thing. The gateways do come with a cost, right? AWS has an API gateway as well. There's a couple of open source ones that you can self-host, right? They all still need to get configured for working with the backend. Obviously, Microsoft's API gateway works with Entra pretty easily. It has a cost associated with it. I think even the developer version is $29 a month or something, or it used to be, right? So it's not a free thing by any stretch of the imagination. But you could then treat your API behind the scenes as like not caring about auth. Like if something gets here, the auth's handled, and you could then do the routing and stuff on the front end and say, the auth is for this route is this, the auth for that route is this, right? So that's one way to do it. But that's one of the things that it makes it easier sometimes to solve the problem right now, but it hasn't necessarily addressed the skill that you wish to acquire to level up, so to speak, right? And again, I think that's some of the big gaps there is how do we level up as engineers who maybe want to delve into a different domain than what we used to, when it's so vast. Like software engineering is a vast domain, and there's a billion different ways to learn software development. But it's like, what's the best way for us as PowerShell people? Is like, I don't know about you guys, but I remember when I was trying to teach myself to code years ago, I'd got through so many books, and by the time I got to chapter 2, I was like, I'm done reading another book that spends the first 3 chapters talking to me about control flow. I know control flow. I've been writing scripts for 10 years. Like control flow doesn't interest me. But I don't want to waste 400 pages getting to the part of the book where I don't need to think about control flow anymore, right? And it's like, how do we find a model where we can introduce the things that are different and the things that you should be paying attention to and that will help level you up without wasting your time teaching about all the stuff that you probably don't need to hear about for the 500th time, right? And I literally stopped teaching myself to program for a while because I'm so bored. Every book's the same. And because again, it's a vast industry, right? It's a massive top level domain all by itself, like software, right? So yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Anyone else? So quiet. I tell you. Do you wish we had power at the desks? Were you all hoping to follow along? Was that kind of what everyone wanted to do? Okay. So it's not just me that was bummed out.
You also would need 200 more DHCP leases on Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
That's true.
We also put it on our phones first.
Yeah. I mean, I got a portable router with me. It could have handled you guys' Wi-Fi to it. Don't know if it quite would have held up to all of you, but
Yeah. Can it let all of us download .NET at the same time?
Well, right. And that's the thing. I think one of the feedback I'd already given to them was like with these kind of sessions, especially if people are structuring them like I was as a workshop, because that was the section I picked, right? It was like, I need to be able to communicate before people get here, even if it's just a couple of days before. Hey, make sure if you type this command on your laptop, this is what you see. If not, get .NET installed, get this installed, blah, blah, blah. Make sure you can run through it. And this is what I would do if I was teaching a class, right? I would get that opportunity. And that's where a lot of this kind of, content is, derived from. Is like, I can teach this stuff in a week or two, and I can deep dive into certain sections of it for an hour, but trying to squeeze that big gap from PowerShell to API C# in 4 hours, I was like, all right, there's a bit more. There's things we gotta, you know what I mean? That was my most enjoyable challenge coming up with all this stuff. Was like, what can I prune out? I mean, question: how was it? Did I make an okay amount of assumptions about what you guys did know about and what you guys didn't know about? Was there some gaps there? And again, you can fill in the feedback form anonymously and stuff like that, right? Because I think that was the fun part. It's a challenge trying to fit any talk into any amount of time, right? Because it's very easy to kind of just balloon. But 4 hours is like, man. I mean, that's a half day workshop, okay, but 0 to API with database, with security. I was like, man, because who wants to do just another API? Oh, you can write to a database. Cool, man. I can't let you touch my database if there's no security around it. I can't let you, my API is no use if it just writes to a local in-memory thing either, right? So it's like trying to get a bit of everything in. It's like, what assumptions can we make? These guys all know coding, right? They don't know C#, but it's not that different. And then you start talking about things like dependency injection, the framework itself. Like, there's a lot more to learn about things like ASP.NET Core. My goal was mainly to show you that you don't need to know all of it to get stuff up and running, especially these days with the tools we have available to us. If you ask the right questions and you kind of know enough, you can kind of help piece that together. Building an API isn't particularly slow anymore, right? It's not a vast, unachievable thing. C# itself also shouldn't be scary for you guys. Like, from the beginning, from the first half of the session's demos, you saw that we can write it by hand if we have to. We don't have to put all the fluff and boilerplate around it, and that we can still get CLIs working pretty quickly. We can get, more importantly, libraries working really quickly, and libraries we can reuse all over the place. And when we did create that first API, we got that hey thing working in like 2 minutes, right? Because we'd already built it in the first half of the session, right? So I know we're at time. I appreciate you all sticking around so long. And like I said, it was a little bit of a mad rush to try and get this all working, given the challenges we faced with power and stuff. But appreciate you all sticking it out, and feel free to find me during the week, ask questions. I'll be way less stressed and way more around now because I won't have a 4-hour talk to rewrite. But yeah, hopefully this was valuable for you guys. I think C# is a great next step for PowerShell people who want to get a little more serious about software. I'm not suggesting you'll need to give up your day jobs and become software developers, because that's not a job for everybody, and I'm not sure people want to put their toes in that water just now with all the layoffs and stuff. But no, I think you can do a lot with software skills, and C# is very versatile. You can build a lot of different things on a lot of different platforms. So thank you so much.